Hello, everyone. Is this good? Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to call the school committee meeting for January 27th, 2025 to order. First item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Mashpee Public Schools recognize and honor the many generations of Wampanoag people who have lived and sustained in this territory for more than 10,000 years. Next item of business is ratification of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Kathy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Dan. Any discussion? Hearing none. Dan, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Okay. And I vote yes. 4 for, 1 against. So I want to welcome our public to this meeting tonight. We will be interviewing the 3 candidates that came out of the hard work and effort that the search committee put in over the last month and a half to review each of the applicants, to interview those that they felt met the criteria and that they wanted to talk to, and then make the hard decision to determine the top 3 candidates that they felt could be the next superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools, and bring those 3 candidates forth for consideration by the whole school committee. So tonight's agenda, we are going to be interviewing those 3 candidates. We have posted who they are. We posted some biographical information about the 3 candidates. We had on-site visits over the last week and a half. We had opportunities for public comment and for people to meet those candidates over that time period. Prior to this search, or as part of this search initially, the school committee did ask the public to provide feedback in regard to what they felt would be the next, or the qualifications and characteristics of the next superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools. That survey was out. We've collected that information. We have also collected information that people have provided subsequently. As for tonight's meeting, there are forms up on that table where that white box is that we would ask individuals if they want to provide feedback on the candidates as you hear them talk tonight and answer the questions from the school committee. We would most graciously appreciate your feedback. It is unanimous. Can't say the word. It is secret, so I will not have any way of telling who is providing what feedback. But we will greatly appreciate any comments that you have. This meeting tonight is going to be recorded, thanks to Mashpee Television, as with most of our meetings. And it will be posted tomorrow morning on Mashpee TV's YouTube channel. It will also be running on the Mashpee TV television channel. So if you miss a question or have a friend who was not able to attend tonight, that will be an opportunity for you to see what happened tonight and make any sort of feedback that you want to the school committee based upon your review of that. So tonight, we have approximately 15 to 20 questions, depending upon the time available, for us to ask the candidates. Each of the members of the school committee will be asking questions There may be follow-ups to some of the questions that we will be asking. The candidates were provided earlier today with a copy of the questions so that they could have a chance to take a quick review and formulate some of their potential answers without having to do it cold. However, it does not prohibit any of the school committee members from asking follow-up questions of the candidate, and obviously those are not shared in advance.
Mr. Chair, can I say something before we proceed?
Sure.
We all received, as a committee, the feedback from the students and the Student Advisory Committee. And with that and the information that they have provided with us, I do not feel comfortable moving forward interviewing these candidates. They were not very happy with what they saw or what they felt from these people, along with our community not being happy about it. So I don't know what we have to do to postpone this, to try to investigate more, but from the feedback that I'm getting from our students, who, not for nothing, are number one in my book, they are not happy with any of these people.
So, Kelly, can you reference it in the document, what those concerns were?
Somebody wasn't excited. I mean, I can pull up the email, we all got it.
Yeah.
You know,
I will
the
also pull it up.
students were stating that, you know, one of them was just answering questions with questions, not answering their actual questions that they were asking. Another candidate was not very excited about coming to Mashpee. And I'm sorry, but in my book, that's a no. No. You need to be excited to be here. You need to be excited to be with our students and in our community. And with that being said, I've had conversations with the chair about this same thing. Our community is outraged. Outraged. And it's not just the people on Facebook, because there are people out there that are not going to go to Facebook. They're not going to put it on social media. They're not happy with the situation.
All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I guess my only concerns would be the process. I think that we're all members of this committee. However, it's out there in the community that we're the ones that decided to bring 3 candidates to us. We were not on the search committee. I think my concerns are more about the process, the questions and the concerns that should be addressed first before proceeding. I think it's a little premature for us to proceed without really talking about it. I mean, this is the time where all of us get to talk as a board. I'm not a fan of breaking any open meeting laws. I don't think there should be communications via email or text messages, and I just feel like we owe it to our community and to ourselves to have an internal conversation before we move forward with the following candidates. Obviously, I'm one person, but I think some of the questions and concerns, and I haven't participated or responded to any of those questions or concerns, just because I feel like this is the appropriate time for us to address those concerns. And if there are concerns out there, I think we should wait to see what happens, whether there's investigations or anything else that's going to take place. I think that we need to get direction from that first before we proceed. I mean, we're within the spirit of the law, but I also feel like we owe it to our community and the students and everybody that we represent. You know, if it was me personally, I would have liked to see more options than less options, but I didn't have that opportunity, and I wouldn't be doing our community a service if I didn't address those concerns also this evening. Also, I voted no on the agenda because there's no public comment. We had talked about this. Our committee had 2 areas and items on for public comment, one in the beginning of the meeting and one in the end of the meeting. It's great that people can ask questions and put it in the box, but I think a lot more people would be here to support us and to talk to these issues if they had the public comment and the opportunity to express their concerns to us directly. So those are my concerns, and that's why I voted no on the agenda and my hesitation on moving forward at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other feedback?
Would you like me to speak to the process, Mr. Chair, or?
Sure. If you want to talk about the process that the search committee went through, that would be appropriate. We have a few more minutes.
Certainly. So in the beginning, we had a meeting, was it October, I believe, mid-October, where we determined we would form a 13-member committee comprised of 2 school committee members, 3 parents, members of faculty, staff, administration, and the community. We put out an email asking, we put it on Facebook, all social media. It went out in the superintendent's notices, and our volunteer coordinator also reached out to all of the various volunteer groups, as well as the English Language Learner Parent Advisory Council and the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, the LPAC and CPAC. We had a tribal representative that was nominated by the tribe that comprised our 13-person committee. As the emails came in, myself and my colleague, Ms. Robson, reviewed each and every person who sent in an email during that time. We held what I felt were productive and good conversations to select people we felt would provide us with honest and open opinions. And I felt we had a very good group of people on that 13-person committee personally. From there, we had our orientation on December 2nd. Unfortunately, we had one member of the committee who had been selected who missed the first two meetings, missed the orientation as well as the second meeting, and did not was not there to get the process of the whole committee explained. That person was replaced by another special education parent. From there, the committee reviewed the 21 candidates. We narrowed it down from 21 to 8. The process was a simple blind vote to start of taking the 21, just a blind vote to get to 8. We discussed each of the candidates that came up during that vote, narrowed it down to the 8 that we then moved on to the preliminary interview section. During the next phase, we interviewed three people one night, 3 people another night, 2 on the last. And then at the last night, we deliberated very vigorously, and I feel it was a very open conversation. Everyone in that meeting was given a chance to speak for or against a candidate that they chose after we took an initial vote of our top 3. So no discussion happened. We did a blind, unanimous vote. All of these votes were blind and unanimous. No one attached a name to it. We did not want any peer pressure. We did not want any influence to these votes. I did not speak to any of the candidates outside of sharing agendas and coordinating. I think the most I spoke with was Ms. Robson. And my texts and emails, you can see it's all just either agenda or logistics of the meeting. No one was spoken to by myself or anyone, I believe, to influence any votes, but it was very strong discussions were had and on all candidates that were in that first vote. After that, we took a second vote to see, if anything changed after that first discussion. Again, anonymous, no names, no hands raising, no indication of who voted whom. We went to a third vote. We ended up coming to 3. There was discussion about a 4th, but my understanding, Mr. Chair, was you said 3. So we went with 3. And the 3 were the top 3 votes is how we did it. So that was the process and how we got to tonight.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That kind of leads into, so tonight's meeting is really informational. It's an opportunity for the school committee to evaluate the 3 candidates that have been moved forward. It's an opportunity for the community to evaluate those 3 candidates. On Wednesday, the committee will meet again. So tonight there are no votes being taken. On Wednesday, there is a meeting scheduled for 6:30 p.m. That will have a period for further comment and discussion by the community and their opportunity for public comment. There's not a public comment in tonight's session so that we can focus on the candidates that have been presented to the school committee for consideration. It will be up to the members of this committee to determine, based upon tonight, the feedback that they get, their consideration of all of the totality of feedback from the community in regard to the fitness of one of the 3 candidates to be the next superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools. That determination will happen on Wednesday.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
who determined that we could only bring 3 candidates to the school board?
May I, if I remember correctly, we've we had this conversation at a previous
Okay.
committee, and I think the consensus across the committee was for the search committee to select 3. So I think, I'm not sure where that confusion is coming from, because that was a discussion that we had as a group about who we wanted to see presented to the school committee. And if I may, Kelly, just back to your point earlier, the document that you're referring to, the candidate feedback form, is that the one that was sent about 3 days ago that was like the spreadsheet?
No, it was sent by our student advisory chair, Eve.
Okay.
It speaks a lot of seemed, it's a little bit more.
But not for nothing, I mean, this is somebody that our students have to work with every day.
Understood.
This is
I'm-
something that our staff has to work with every day, and it is clear, and it can't be any clearer in front of our faces, that that this cannot keep going.
All right, so this was a process that we started last fall. This is the next step of the process. I understand that there are some sentiments that there may be someone else that should have been a candidate. This is not the point at which that consideration should be undertaken. We have the hard work that the search committee has done. It is up to this committee to review those candidates and determine whether or not they fit what we are looking for. That determination has to be done on Wednesday. So tonight, your focus should be on evaluating the 3 individuals that we have invited to come meet with the school committee and with our community as we ask them specific questions which will help you determine whether or not you feel they are the best candidate for being the next superintendent. That is tonight's focus. Come Wednesday, you may determine what you want, but tonight is for you to gather information in regard to the qualifications of each of these 3 individuals.
Just, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a point of order. I'd like to see the meeting minutes where it was voted on that there would be 3 candidates. We can go off of consensuses, maybe we can check Mashpee TV, but unless it's in the meeting minutes, I don't know how legal or binding that would be, and it was not a recommendation. Maybe I might have missed that meeting. It's not, I don't think it's the point that you insinuated, oh, it's the other candidate. It's about 3, 4 different options. I mean, we didn't have that opportunity. That's my concern. If it's in the meeting minutes, you can prove me wrong, but once again, to hear that there was 3 people that were picked, and I think it was Ms. Lewis that said the chair was the one that determined. I thought we all collectively make the decision, so I would question what power and authority the chair has to make that decision.
I believe if we do check the minutes from that meeting in October, we will find that when we set up the subcommittee, that was what they were tasked with doing, along with, we talked about the constituency of the subcommittee, or of the search committee. And I'm not sure, Sherry, if you're able to pull up those minutes to
I have
quickly.
minutes from 12/18. The search process update was provided by Ms. Lewis, and there were 21 candidates hoping to move 6 to 8
No,
candidates.
it would have been a school committee meeting prior to that.
This is where I have the notes that you're looking for, though.
Oh, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
21 candidates hoping to move 6 to 8 candidates forward for preliminary interviews, 2 to 3 candidates for finalist interviews.
But that was the subcommittee meeting, correct?
No, this was a regular school committee meeting. I did not receive minutes for this subcommittee meeting.
All right, there were, the subcommittee met in executive session to retain the confidentiality of the information from each of the candidates. So those executive minutes are not available for release. So we have an agenda. We need to move forward with this. I ask each of you to pay attention to the candidates that we bring in and rigorously evaluate them based upon your criteria. And then some of your discussion can be held on Wednesday. Okay? With that, we're running a little behind, but we might make it up. We've got breaks, about a 10-minute break scheduled between the candidates. And then we will bring the next one in. So, first candidate we're going to bring in is Vanessa Bouchon.
Mr. Chair, before we go forward, I think I'm going to have to recuse myself because I really don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with the process. I don't feel comfortable with moving forward
All right,
with
you-
any of this stuff,
you
to be
have-
honest with you.
You have that right, so if you want to recuse yourself, you can. All right. Thank you. So the way this process is going to work, you're going to have 3 minutes to do a introductory comment, then we'll ask questions, and then at the end, you'll have a couple minutes to do a closing statement. So I will turn the floor over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to all of you, all the school committee members, members of the search committee, and all of you here tonight. It is an honor to be here this evening as a candidate for the next superintendent of Mashpee Public Schools. In the next few minutes, I will share how, as superintendent, I would be able to engage in collaborative leadership, striving for excellence for students and our educators, being present, accessible, and approachable, and ensuring that we're educating the whole child moving forward. 4 key characteristics of your next superintendent. So as a collaborative leader throughout my career, I have really valued the ability to leverage the strengths within a group that brings multiple perspectives, and I feel that in that setting, your achievements can far surpass what a single person can do when leading individually. This is also true just of the budget process too, that in order to ensure that the community understands the needs of the school district and how funds are prioritized moving forward, it takes 3 things. It takes collaboration for sure, not only within the school department, but with the school committee, obviously, and the town side as well, and the community as a whole. And so we do that by ensuring that we have a strong commitment to the district's strategic values and goals moving forward in prioritization. And we do that through communication. And that's really key, ensuring that members of the community know where we are financially and where we are going to be putting money for the next year and why. And by having those conversations early and often, it's a transparent process, and there are no surprises when it comes to town meeting and it's time to vote. Excuse me, just one moment. In addition to collaborative leadership, certainly I feel that the students and educators, we need to foster the learning of both, not only the students, but ensure that we are feeding passions for our professionals as well as our students. And by doing so, they feel supported where they need to grow, and that it's important to model that myself, and that if I'm continuing to learning and grow and evolving in my role, then that will help the district as well. In addition to collaborative leadership, striving for excellence, also just making sure that I am present. I am a Mashpee resident, and I really couldn't be more invested in serving the community in which I live. It's something that I have tried to do throughout my career, either living in the town or adjacent to where I am serving in the school community. And that's really allowed me to immerse myself and be an integral part of the community. So on or off campus, it allows me to build connections with students, families, staff members, and the community partnerships by playing an active role, excuse me. And finally, just educating the whole child is so important, and I'm so drawn to be a member of the school committee, of the school community in Mashpee, where that has been a foundation of the work, is ensuring that We are acknowledging the importance of social and emotional growth as well as academic growth, and ensuring that students feel seen, heard, and valued as members of the community. So knowing that Mashpee already has a strong foundation in this regard, I am fervently ready to pick up the mantle and continue the work, and look forward to seeing all that we can do for our Mashpee scholars. Thank you.
All right, thank you. First question, it's a three-part question. What motivates you to leave your current position in school district, and why are you specifically interested in the opportunity here in Mashpee? Part two, what do you believe you will be able to accomplish in this new role that you could not in your current role? And third, what makes you the best candidate to be the next superintendent of Mashpee?
Great, thank you. So I did mention some of this in my opening statement too, just that I'm very loyal to the community that I serve in, and so I was living in Rentham and serving in Rentham for 8 years. And when my husband and I moved down to East Falmouth originally, and now I'm over the line in Mashpee, when we first came down here, I stayed in Rentham because I had developed a family within the Rentham School District. And why I want to be in Mashpee, beyond the fact that I really do want to be invested in my own community and serve and give back to the community in the way that I can, it struck me immensely when I did the site visit the other day, how family came up again with students and with staff members, that Mashpee's a very special community, and the connectedness that students have with the teachers and the connectedness that the teachers have with one another is really palpable when you're on campus, even for a short period of time. I've also had the opportunity over the last few years, being a member of the community, to talk with students who actually have attended all of the schools, and including some graduates too, who they don't know what my day job is. They only know me from being a community member. And I was really struck too. There wasn't anything to say about their experience in Mashpee that was anything but positive. Feeling that they were cared about by their teachers, feeling they were invested in their learning, and given many opportunities that they've seen other peers don't have in other communities. So those are the reasons why I am strongly motivated to be here. And as far as what I would accomplish and why that would be different in this role, is that for the last 7 years, I've really been focused on the teaching and learning aspect. So certainly teaching and learning for students, but also professional growth for educators, as well as working on the administration of the grants and ensuring that English learner education and Title I are affording us as many opportunities for students as possible. I have been a part of a pre-K to 12 district for the rest of my career, and am really eager to get back to having the whole span of early childhood through graduation and beyond, and having a chance to collaboratively lead the district forward. All of the experiences that I've had in multiple communities and different roles have trained me well to serve in a positive way. As far as what makes me the best candidate, I think if you talked with anyone who knows me, they would say that I am collaborative, I'm a hardworking, passionate, empathetic leader, and that I have a servant's heart. I really long to contribute and collaborate with others. So I can do this I can live that out rather by ensuring that the compass with which I make decisions is student-centered. And that's aligned very well with the Mashpee vision and mission to really keep the centrality of what happens into students as the forefront of the decision-making process.
All right, thank you very much. Dan, you have the second question?
Yes. Thank you and welcome. My question is, in your professional and personal opinion, what do you see as Mashpee School District's current strengths and pain points?
Great, thank you. So there are many strengths that I know of already, and I'm sure I would find others upon being involved directly with the community. But certainly the support that the schools have from the community, and when even just looking at all that is done without requiring fees for students and their families. And that really helps to level the playing field also and ensure that we are creating equitable access for more students. So that's definitely a strength. Understanding that student success is judged by more than just academic achievement, and ensuring that we are preparing students well in other ways as well as social emotional realms. The efforts to appreciate diversity, ensure equity, and promote inclusion is certainly a strength. Whether it's the We Are Mashpee or I Fit at Mashpee, at MPS rather, those are efforts that make that visible. No Place for Hate makes that visible, that this is a value held strongly. That is a strength. I would only add belonging to that I do feel that inclusion is the reaching out, and belonging is the person on the other side feeling that, that it worked and that they are a part of the community. The desire to have a reciprocal relationship with the community partners is also a strength, whether it's working with the Wampanoag Tribe Council or CPAC, LPAC, the Townwide Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. So all of those relationships, I think that is a strength. Certainly, I mentioned before the strong relationship between students and teachers, and the innovation pathways that we have at Mashpee that provide opportunities to get a head start on a positive career choice moving forward, and gives students a leg up in a particular area of interest. So I would say, you know, there are a few areas for potential growth that I see. I think number one on the docket is solidifying the leadership team and making sure there's longevity there, because there's been a fair amount of turnover over the last few years. And when I spoke with a few students on my site visit too, they're looking for it too. They're looking for consistency and stability, and with that comes comfort and a notion of safety. And when students feel that, they are better positioned to achieve. What I would like to learn more about are the ELA and math instruction and the database decision making done with the STAR tests that happen up through 10th grade. There might be some opportunities there to look for trends over time in terms of what growth we need to look for next. I think anytime we're identifying an area of growth, it's important to think systemically and ensure that we are not looking to fix things that don't need to be fixed, that they may be indicators of another issue. So I just think it's important. I would hesitate to make a rash call of what one area would need to be included, would need to change or be updated for instruction without having the data from the inside that I wouldn't have being outside of the school district. And certainly just ensuring high attendance and participation of all students, and that the data has shown that students who are chronically absent, and there have definitely been improvements in that area over time, but the data has shown that when students are chronically absent, they perform half a proficiency band below their peers who are not chronically absent. So that's statistically significant at that point, that we need to continue to focus on that.
All right, thank you. Kathy?
Hi, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
This is a two-part question. The district has experienced a great deal of instability over the last few years in terms of administration, which has caused some degree of unease and trust issues within the school, with families, and with other stakeholders. How do you envision the process to create a stable and equitable environment so that the needs of the faculty and staff, the needs of the students, and the needs of the town are all considered? Mm-hmm. And the second part is, how do you see your role as superintendent in maintaining a healthy working and learning environment for all?
Great, thank you. So for this reason, because there's there's a sense of instability, and that can breed some distrust sometimes. It's the reason that I think that any entry plan needs to happen before July 1, needs to start in some respect before July 1. Of course, that would need to be done only at a time that would be amenable to the current administration, but I do believe that a fair amount of outreach is necessary to ensure that the needs of the students, their families, the faculty and staff in the town are heard and therefore then considered moving forward. So some examples would be, of course, meeting with the current administrative team members to learn about what worked well, what hasn't, and what they believe can make a difference. Same is true of working with other partnerships also, just reaching out to see whether it's speaking with someone from the tribal council or talking with the members of the town diversity, equity, inclusion team, and just trying to get a better handle on what people are thinking and feeling about the relationships and moving forward. I think that it's important to show students before they leave for the summer who is going to be there when they return to school in September, and have an understanding of who that person is. So, something as simple as having a school assembly at Coombs and Quashnet, and the middle high school maybe in grade spans, since that's a large group. But even just having an opportunity for students and staff members to share questions from their perspectives and be open and honest, and almost like a talk show format for throwing out the questions and then sharing honest responses about that experience. Joining school council meetings at each school, as well as student councils for the schools that have them. And then finally, and I think this is really important, family forums need to happen, available for families at all of the schools. I would suggest times that are either in the evening, 6 to 7:30, or early morning meetings before people head off to work. I have found this to be really effective in providing multiple times that people can gather at times that are convenient to them. And so I think that's essential. And I'm sure there are other things I can keep adding to the list. But as far as healthy working and learning environment for all, I would just share that this process that I'm talking about making sure that we're listening to all of the different constituents all along the way, isn't just an onboarding plan. That is an ongoing plan where we always have to be reflective about our practice and any actions that we take, and assess what is working and what isn't, and being humble enough to make a change if that's necessary. So I do think, listening is the first step, but then it's working collaboratively, that when we hear opportunities that might be out there to make things better and identify, this could be another third rail, we want to avoid that at all costs, then we can talk together about how can we make this work. And again, as I said at the very beginning, it's through that collaboration where those great ideas and plans can come, where you can increase buy-in and support for any actions that are taken, and that is just much more well-received than making a step forward on one's own.
Thank you.
Brian?
What are your top priorities for improving student academic performances across the district?
Okay, great, thank you. Definitely ensuring that students are in school and attending and participating. I would like to learn a little bit more about the ELA and math instruction in particular. Just looking, again, I admit that I only have what's available to the public, but with the dedication and support that Mashpee has, there may be some room for improvement in those areas, although it would require some deeper analysis to determine exactly where. We are comparable to where the state is in some areas, and in some areas we are beyond that as far as proficiency levels, but that might be an area to investigate further. I would love to know more about the academic interventions that are done through MTSS. So definitely the behavioral and social emotional realms of MTSS, but there may be particular interventions that are really working well. And there could be an opportunity for other types of interventions to take place, or organizational structures that could help, such as tutorials and opportunities like that. I would like to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of the student groups. So whether it's students with disabilities, English learners, students in the low-income student group, as well as participation in AP. Are we looking for students who might benefit from those opportunities that aren't included in those classes? So I think those would be what I'm curious about and would want to learn more about going forward.
Thank you.
Next question is another three-part question. What is your philosophy on delegating authority? How do you maintain accountability? And one of the jobs of a leader is to help set the tone for others. If you were the next superintendent of the Mashpee schools, what tone would you like to set? And what specific actions would you take to set it for our educators, students, professionals, and community members?
Okay, thank you. So as far as the philosophy on delegating authority goes, so I really believe in facilitative model of leadership, where for team goals that we work collaboratively, so supporting team members to accomplish those goals, encouraging participation from all of the team members. Not everyone will be as forthcoming, but it's important that we are honoring everybody's valuable insights. Coaching members to, and that they have the support to take calculated risks with trying something new when it's going to advance us closer to the goal. And then certainly finding those opportunities to celebrate success all along the way, not waiting to the end, but those small steps that help you make progress. But for individual goals and individual team members, it's important to remember that, teachers need a certain amount of autonomy over what happens in their classroom. So when questions come up about teaching and what happens in the classroom, the teacher needs to be the first person that's contacted about that. Similarly, the principals and assistant principals need to have the autonomy they know the culture of their school best. They know the types of support and directedness that different members of the school community may need at different parts of their developmental career as professionals. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the superintendent to ensure that we have well-functioning teams and that they are well-supported to do what they need to do. So I guess that in sum is my philosophy of delegating authority, that we all have a realm that we are responsible for. There's a certain element of hierarchy, and I gave you some examples there. So how do you maintain accountability? I think that first starts with expectations. So what are our strategic goals that we have, and what are the norms that we have for how we're going to work with one another to achieve those goals? I think when those two things are known up front, then you take away the mystery of how we're all going to work and engage with one another. And then the accountability lies in if we aren't able to maintain those, then what kind of support is necessary, or what type of direction needs to be given at that point. So within the organizational structure in Mashpee, there is a certain amount of hierarchy that as we go from classroom to school, or as we go from classroom to department to school. But then within that, we should all be working towards the same thing. So the other part of the accountability would come in terms of if things aren't going as planned and we need to intervene and provide additional support to help move someone in a direction that's more aligned with what the goals are. And that could be professional development, or that could be an opportunity to reframe how the team functions. So those are just some of the examples. As far as setting the tone, I mentioned this before, and the word being of a family, and what I mean there is not the nuclear family that we have in our homes, but that there's a strong sense of responsibility. There's responsibility to oneself and one's integrity. There's a responsibility to following through with what we aim to do as educators for our students. And there's a responsibility that we have to one another to follow through with what we say we're going to do. And there's a responsibility for one another where we take care of each other. And that it's a team where when someone needs help with something, you step in. If that may not be, I'm often covering for a class or helping the kids get on the bus or filling in for whatever's needed. I always think that you never ask someone to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. And so I'm more than happy to step in, and I find that relationships grow deeper when people see that you're there with them. You're there to support them.
All right, thank you. Kathy?
Yes, this is another two-part question. Extracurricular activities are an integral part of a child's life, especially when going through school. How do you plan to support these activities financially, and what is your plan for attending these events? And then the second part, many after-school clubs in Mashpee are shown to have the same high-achieving students. What is your plan to create more of an academically diverse participation rate?
So I do feel that it's important that we model what living a balanced life looks like here. When we want our students to enjoy living fully after school too. So it's important that we are valuing all aspects of their lives, and it provides wonderful opportunities to certainly collaborate with others in a way that you do differently than in the classroom, and experience good sportsmanship, being a member of, whether it's a member of the team or a member of a musical ensemble. All of these are important. Some of these are likely to be included in the budget to some degree, and when they aren't, there are other opportunities for funding as far as Title IV. There's opportunity for enrichment through that ESSA grant. There are also what they call after-school or out-of-school time grants, or ASOST, if you've heard of that. Those become available periodically, and that can provide a great opportunity for those as well. And as far as being involved, again, one of the benefits of living in Mashpee is that I can participate in these. It's certainly not possible for a superintendent or anyone to attend all of the events. I had trouble attending all of my own kids' events because you have 2 kids and you have to get to so many places. But I do make an effort to be a part of things. I had the chance to hear the middle and high school chorus concert the other day, and just it's important for students and staff members to see that that's valued also. So I definitely would be visible at those. I have been known to participate in the 8th grade basketball game, although not very successfully, I will admit. But it's, when there are opportunities to be involved and take a risk myself and be vulnerable, I'd like to join in. As far as the after-school clubs, it would be good first to find out where the students' interests are overall. So if all of the students could participate in all of the activities, where would they like to be, and then determine what the barriers are. So is the barrier a financial one? Is it a transportation issue? Those opportunities to do something beyond the academics can be a lifeline for students particularly students with any sort of trauma or who have any difficulty with friendships or having something that you connect to so strongly with a passion like the arts or a sport. It really can be a literal lifeline for students. So I would want to look further to see what we could do to increase involvement. And if that meant additional funding, there are other creative ways too, and looking out for sponsors for different things that we need to participate in, or if there's a DECA conference coming up and we need to figure out how to make that work. It's important.
Thank you.
Next question, please provide us with a comprehensive vision for elevating special education services in our district. Specifically describe how you would assess the current practices, implement improvements to instruction, and develop the capability of our special education teachers to serve our students on IEPs better. Include concrete examples from your experience demonstrating your effectiveness in leading such initiatives.
Sure. So first, I would want to see and understand, the distribution of the needs of the students throughout the grades. Look at the achievement and growth of the students over the time that they've been with us. Understand more about what programs that are in place are working well. Understand what barriers there are to inclusion, always making sure that we have students in the least restrictive environment and that they are educated with their peers whenever possible. We would then need to project the staffing needs if there are any changes to be made, and of course identify any particular materials, resources, personnel, or professional development that needs to be made, put into place rather, to build the capacity of the teaching staff that we have, and that includes the paraprofessionals who are often doing some of the most difficult jobs in the district with oftentimes the least amount of training. So that's something that we could be investigating further. As far as my own experience, I've in a few different roles been involved in the district-wide program for students with autism in a few different districts. And that required different programming for different students depending on the year. So it's important that whenever we are thinking about any changes within special education, that we are not trying to fit our students into an existing program, but looking at what are the needs of our students, and then how are we going to design the program and staffing around that need. So that's an essential reframing if that's not already happening. In addition to the programs for students with autism, definitely doing full inclusion pairing. So having a two-teacher team where one teacher this is just one way to do this, but one teacher teaches ELA and social studies and the other teaches math and science, but they have two cohorts that they're responsible for with a special educator and a paraprofessional as well. So there are always two adults in the classroom at any one time. And with careful scheduling, it allows the special educator to be in touch with each of the students on their caseload each day, whereas, and that special educator is then informing the paraprofessional what to do with the classroom teacher during that time. Those types of programs can be very helpful and can be scheduled many different ways. Co-teaching models where the special educator and the classroom teacher are co-teaching. This has been especially helpful at middle school in the middle school model, and ensuring that we could have more students within inclusion because everything is scaffolded based on their specific accommodations. Certainly professional development, not only for special educators, but also for classroom teachers, especially if they are working with students with a profile they haven't had experience with before. And that's really helpful to make sure that we have consistent instruction across the board, as well as with special subject teachers. So if there are communication boards that need to be used in all classrooms, that includes special subjects should know how to interact with students during those times. And finally, specialized tutoring whether it's an Orton-Gillingham approach for particular students, or whether it's a sensory program that needs to be put into place. Those might be options as well.
All right, thank you. Dan?
All right. In the past, what strategies and initiatives have you used to assess and respond to the mental health, substance use, and social determinants of health needs of your students?
Thank you. So in some respects, some of the questions on school needs surveys can get to some of that, as far as the safety elements and identifying areas where there may be, they may be vulnerable for students to engage in risky behaviors. So some of that can come up on a school needs survey. But in addition, there are some social emotional scales that can be used in schools periodically. One is the SSIS, which has been used with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And I've had experience in Brookline with the Metro West survey. And that really covers a broad spectrum of areas. We're using that at KP as well, which is for grades 7 through 12. And that identifies if there's substance use or other at-risk behaviors, suicidal ideology. And so that gives us, through percentages, some things that we can do educationally to raise awareness, not only with students, but sometimes with families. So as these trends are noted, in that old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. If we're all connected and we're all partnering together, and letting students know where they can go for help, and what is a typical challenge you may be facing, and if there are challenges other than that you're facing, this is how we can help. So there are lots of ways to kind of wrap around services to help students in that regard, but those surveys have been really helpful where they're anonymous, and they can provide trends about, you may uncover some areas that need attention that you didn't know otherwise.
Next question. Please elaborate on your management style. Share any experiences you have had with staff or families that required you to investigate or to navigate high tension or sensitive issues where things could easily escalate.
Thank you. So essentially, my response is largely dictated by the individual situation I find myself in. So typically, my approach is maintaining a positive, compassionate, and empathetic approach into conversations. Sometimes we may be surprised when conversations go awry, but I have found that maintaining that calm, even-keeled manner is usually reflected. So if I remain calm, even if someone is starting to get excited, they can usually remain calm too. And if not, then I validate what I'm hearing. And when I sense that there's a certain emotion elevating, that I can validate that and understand that when you have those emotions, that's really challenging, and I'm here to listen. Well, help me to understand how that happens. And I've found that has been a successful approach. When I know there have been times I've had to end a meeting because it wasn't going to be a productive conversation, and so we would reschedule the meeting at a time when we could talk calmly with one another and make sure that each of us is being listened to. That has been successful. And then before restarting that meeting, I let the person know that I'm meeting with, or the people know that this is what we're going to be meeting about. This is the goal of the meeting. Let me know if there's something else that you wish for us to discuss, and laying the ground rules that we will talk together today, and we'll work on these issues. If we find that we need to reschedule, we'll do that. So still remaining calm and open to listen, but also making sure that it's respectful. We would want that for any community member in Mashpee.
All right, thank you. Brian?
All right, this is a two-part question. How will you ensure culturally responsive teaching practices are implemented across all schools? And what strategies will you implement to foster a positive and inclusive school climate?
Great, thank you. So one of the things that I think has been helpful over the last few years is that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, when they released their educator evaluation guidelines, one of the things they used to talk about is creating a SMART goal where it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And they added, it's now a SMARTY goal to include inclusive and equitable, and ensuring that we are creating our student learning goals and professional practice goals in that way. And that deliberate inclusion of this in the goal setting, I think has been a positive step to ensure that that's something that we're thinking about all the time. Making sure that are we designing learning experiences that are not gauged in just one mainstream approach and then we fill in. Let's first think about it being more universally designed and ensuring that in how we are providing this learning opportunity for our students, we're thinking ahead of the time what the barriers may be. So if I know that this part of the lesson may be difficult for certain students, I'm going to build that in as an option already so that it meets the needs of all types of learning styles and learning preferences. So I think that has been helpful. As far as fostering a positive and inclusive culture, one of the things that I think has helped in the last couple of districts I've been in has been focusing deliberately on our current practices in 3 areas. Certainly our policies and organizational practices in how we function and how we lead events or how we lead parent-teacher conferences. So thinking about our practices and if there's anybody that is not considerate, if we were not considering their viewpoint in this process. So for example, parent-teacher conferences, if you speak another language, that is really tough. So what are we doing to make sure that, do we have interpreters there for those families, or do we use the time kettle earbuds to make sure that they can hear it in their own language and participate fully? So what are we doing to ensure that? So that's what I mean by the practices and policies. But we also look at the curriculum, making sure that we are always looking for, and this includes individual teachers, looking at anything that they bring into the classroom to ensure that there are not stereotypes included in there. And if there is a historical representation that is obliterating a different perspective, then we need to have a way to address that and to help students become critical readers and thinkers of history, to make sure that they are always thinking whose voice isn't represented in this story. So I think there are practices that we can do to help foster that positive, inclusive school climate. So curriculum I mentioned, practices and policies, and finally people and human resources. So one element we've been working on is making sure that we can have some diversification in the makeup of our staff and ensuring that our students see themselves as successful educators or different roles in their future. And it's challenging for students, especially if they are not seeing themselves in the community. So we've been working hard to diversify our staff. Admittedly, it's challenging. My current district is not near any public transportation, so that's really challenging when we're trying to get staff from college towns to come to us, or so it can be a little tricky, but we've been working on that. as well. So that's what I mean about people and human resources, and making sure that we're looking to have a representative portion of our staff to match our school community.
Thank you. Describe a situation where you had to take full responsibility for a challenging issue within your district, and how did you address it?
Okay. Well, the one that comes to mind is we were in the middle of a large building project that was scheduled to be completed in July, and we were going to be moving in over the summer to our brand-new building and in September. So the staff had packed up, and everything is in boxes, ready to go. And then in the middle of July, we find out that construction is delayed, and we are going to be in the same school we are now. We've been staying there for 2 years. I needed to let the staff know that even though they spent all of that time, they're going to need to come back and unpack and teach for 6 weeks, and then pack up and move over Columbus Day weekend to the new school. So that, I think, was the hardest message I've had to deliver, and it affected everybody, and the students, the families, everybody. Nobody was happy about it. Everybody was upset and feeling disappointed and a little angst, and we addressed it. I will say. I had full responsibility in some areas because I was the principal of the school at the time, and the superintendent shared that responsibility with me, and we led an emergency school council meeting for the whole community to come together and talk about how we were going to make this work, and then from there. I worked with a group of parents and teachers to talk about the transition and how we were going to make this positive for the kids and how we were going to make it through with one another. So I think how we addressed it was sometimes with those difficult messages, you need to just say it and get the message out, and then be able to say, what you're going to do to support and, make it as palatable as possible, and taking ideas from everybody from their perspective about what we can do to make it easier. Ultimately, I think the transition plans and all of the communication throughout the summer about the progress, and then through the early fall about the progress, that really helped smooth things over. We had a wonderful opening on Columbus Day weekend that year. Everybody was just so happy to be in the building. It was almost like we didn't really forget, but it was almost like we could forget about the hard time that we had. And it was tough for everybody, but ultimately, the communication and working collaboratively made the difference.
All right, thank you.
Another two-parter for
Okay.
you. Describe what you would plan to accomplish as superintendent in your first 90 days in our district. Describe what resources and support you envision needing from students, parents, faculty, and the community to help you.
Okay. So some of it I've talked about before, just as far as kind of being on a listening tour to get to know what the common experiences and the unique experiences are for different constituencies. So that would definitely be a part of what I would want to do within the first 90 days, if not before. Certainly the understanding of the facilities and upcoming needs, maybe not this year, maybe not something that we need right away, but to have an understanding of what might be coming down the pike. Having opportunities to meet students, staff, and families, and getting to know other members of the community I haven't met on the municipal side, including public safety, as well as Wampanoag Tribal Council and liaisons. I think that there may be opportunities that I could learn from that are already in place. If this happened to be a school needs survey year, for example, that might help me to get some information about the experiences from the staff and the families, as well as if you, I don't know if you do it with students as well, if they haven't, oh, they do, that's wonderful. And then if, after seeing those results, if there were still things that I needed to know, perhaps I wouldn't want to over-survey people, so I'd want to start with the school needs survey, but perhaps if there's other things that I would like to know, to send out my own with just a few questions. I wouldn't want to duplicate efforts, certainly, but that might help, as well as the forums with the different constituents. And I think I mentioned on another question, too, just having an opportunity to meet with students directly. That is really important. That's why we're here. So we want to make sure that the students are heard and that there's a regular process for that. And I would certainly want there to be opportunities to check in about how it's going. So it's good to have that 90-day mark, but then to have that kind of 360 evaluation and putting myself out there just to say, you know, these were the goals I came in with based on what the community wanted. How am I doing? And then go on from there.
Thank you. Another three-part question. How do you go about planning a budget and taking it through the budget process? If there was a decrease requested by the town in the district's proposed budget for next year, how would you lead the district to resolve this? And third, what would you think about, with whom would you consult, and how would you prioritize the many elements of academic, student, family, and staffing needs of the district?
Okay. So starting with the budget process, you know, we start with how are we going to continue the services that we already have this year and while we're planning for the next year. And then what other program do we need to account for going forward? So who will be joining our district? Are there additional students with complex profiles that we need to account for, additional staffing, or perhaps out of district if there's something that we're not able to meet in district? And then after we look at the difference between where we are now, if we were to project with the increase from this year to next year, considering all of the fixed costs as well as then including, the services that we want to add for the following year, that would determine where we want to be. And then it's important that we have these conversations collaboratively too, just to ensure that we are incorporating the individual building needs as well as department level needs. So it could be a situation where the principal, assistant principal from one school may see certain needs are priorities, but there may be priorities at the same level of urgency from student services also. So we need to kind of lay everything out on the table and determine how we're going to prioritize that. And if there were a decrease in the proposed budget, we would need to meet with the leadership team members and determine if there are other ways that we could make up for any shortfall there. So if the original budget actually met our needs for the next year, but then it came back to us that we needed to decrease it, we could potentially look for other grants for portions of that payment. So, for example, Title I funds might be able to pay for a portion of or might be able to pay for a paraprofessional salary who's providing literacy instruction. Or it could be that we're able to supplement an arts teacher funding, arts teacher salary through some Title IV funding. Or, so there could be some grant opportunities there. There could be potentially some other revolving accounts that we could pull for certain purposes. There may be some capital expenditures, one-time expenditures that might be needed. If there's a new program coming in, for example, that might be a way to decrease the text costs. So kind of looking for where can we recoup and not have to cut any services. But then we'd have to look at cuts by talking with the principals about maybe there are some courses that no longer have an enrollment that really warrants running a full course for a full year. So there might be some hard decisions to make there. I think that principals have a great pulse on the staffing in the building and what level is needed. So we definitely want to talk with them there, as well as the person who's going to be ultimately in charge of Title I and English learners. So there might be some ways there that we can look at curriculum, instructional support. And then considering barriers, are there any students that are left out of the opportunities if we are cutting certain elements of the budget? So I don't think that there's any hard and fast list of how you prioritize that, because it really depends on your needs any given year. But ultimately, it's important to look at what are we legally bound to provide for. So there may be some special education costs that fall under that category. But then as far as what would we like to do if we aren't able to fund it the way we initially thought, there may be another creative way that we can make that happen. It may mean some shifting in roles of sometimes we've had the need to change a small percentage of a teacher's role just to cover, one section of one class for that one semester or something like that if it's necessary. But those aren't frequent occurrences. But I hope that helps a little bit.
Just a quick
Yes.
follow-up. Can you tell me explicitly what your budget responsibility is right now in your current position?
In my current position, it is for curriculum, anything related to curriculum and instruction, professional development, and the ESSA grants, and any other state or competitive grants that I do. And I'm involved collaboratively with the superintendent and other members of the leadership team on the budget.
Okay, so you're responsible for developing that part of the overall school budget, correct?
Yes, but in the last two districts I've worked in, we've looked at that as a whole leadership team. So we're looking at that together.
All right, thank you.
All right, I know you've gone a little bit into this, but in your previous work experiences, what strategies have you used to become a connected member of your community beyond just your role as the leader of the school district?
Sure. So certainly participating in town meetings and staying abreast of the news in town, celebrating the success with community members, attending Rotary events, Lions Club, and other, community organizations, faith organizations that I've been a part of.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Brian?
What professional development opportunities will you provide for teachers to enhance their instructional skills?
Sure. So I think that, as I mentioned before, I think it's important to feed the passion. So there's usually a fair amount. I've been responsible for planning the professional development and always beginning with a survey about, these are our strategic goals, so these are going to be part of what we're focused on for professional development for everybody for this year. But then within that, what are the other areas that you are looking to improve in your own practice? And usually there are some suggestions for things that, I know have come up in the past just to see who else needs that. There could be some additional opportunities for special education PDPs or for SEI, Sheltered English Immersion PDPs, to help teachers get that set up for their recertification. So if there are those types of requests, that comes up. And then if we have an opportunity to have a technology PD that's for the whole district, then we can open it up to see, what areas of technology, if the goal is to meet each and every learner where they are and incorporate technology, what areas are of interest to them, and then really catering that to feed what they need in that moment. There's certainly other opportunities to provide professional development if you have someone who's not taught a specific program or taught a specific course before. They may need that specific professional development for content. So we've done that for anyone who's changing a subject that they're teaching and provided professional development that way. So that could be developing PD plans by department, by role, as well as there's some, like I said, that would be across the district.
All right, I'm just going to do a quick time check. We did start a few minutes late, so I think we have time probably for one more question for the committee. We'll open this to the members if someone has a question particularly that they want to ask. And then we'll do the closing.
Okay.
Anyone?
I have no additional.
Kathy? Brian?
No.
Unfortunately, we don't really have minutes. If you come here, you'll find that I am never short of questions. So I have a two-part question for you. What strategies do you use to build trust and rapport with union stakeholders within the community and to understand their perspectives and concerns? Can you describe a situation where you had to navigate a complex situation with union stakeholders, and how did you achieve a mutually beneficial agreement with the union and the district?
Okay. Well, I'd say I've been extremely lucky in working in districts where there was a very collaborative relationship with union leadership, and I found that it was really helpful just to have an open line of communication with the union leadership. If I knew that something might be coming up or might be difficult for the members of the union, then I would reach out to union leadership and just explain this is coming down, and I think whatever the particulars are for a particular situation, I would share that and just say, I'm here, if we want to talk through some ways that we can manage that, or if there has to be some difficult news to be shared, I would give the union leadership a heads up that if there was a cutting of a position coming or something like that. And we would talk collaboratively, and that was really helpful because then the member felt supported by the union leadership, and they also saw that we were willing to, that I was willing to help work the situation out. I will say a difficult situation was involving a very young student with very challenging behaviors, and the staff members did not feel safe, and it wasn't something I had seen firsthand, and so it was news to me, and then I found out that they were going to grieve it as a safety concern. So that was it was my first year as a principal. So that was and it was early. It was very early in the year, and from that point on, everything worked out fine. I met with the teachers who were concerned. We put a plan in place. Most importantly, we got the student the help and support that student needed. And the staff members were supported. The student was able to engage in the learning and within the school community, which was also, it ended well, but it was a difficult situation, and there was a loss of a feeling of comfort in the building in that short period of time when the staff member felt that the student was making the situation unsafe. So after that is when I really cultivated that opportunity of having a set time to meet with union leadership often, so that we could make sure that if, as something is bubbling up, that we address it. It was something that escalated very quickly, so I'm not sure, even with the regular time, it would have helped in that particular situation, but that's what comes to mind is a challenging situation. But ultimately, I think any time that you've set a precedent to be collaborative and wanting to work as a partner, that's been very helpful. And always making sure that I'm listening with empathy to everything that the teachers are experiencing.
All right, I appreciate that. With that, we'll give you a couple minutes to do your closing statement.
Okay, thank you. So I first just want to say again, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you and to talk a little bit more about my experience. And I will be brief. I know we're over time. So I just want to say that as the superintendent of Mashpee, I really would do so with intention to an aim that whatever I say and do would be able to come across with compassion and empathy and build one another up. And I feel that that starts with listening, making sure that everyone feels heard, and that through listening we can build trust with one another, and that through that, that's how we build relationships over time. And ultimately, it's those relationships that will form a strong community and bring us to the place where we feel unified. And when we do, that's when Mashpee will be at its strongest, when we're all working well as two-way reciprocal partners between and among the school staff here, certainly, but with the community as well. So again, it was an honor to be here with you this evening, and I would consider it a privilege to serve the community as the next superintendent.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
All right, we have a break until 6:40, so approximately 11 minutes, and we will have the next interview. So if you want to stretch your legs or use the water fountain or the bathrooms, okay? We will start promptly at 6:40. Thank you. All right, evening, thank you. I'd like to introduce Michelle Connors, and as we've outlined earlier, you'll have about 3 minutes to do an opening statement, then you'll have question and answer session with the committee, and then at the end, you'll have another 2 minutes to do a closing statement. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's nice to see you all in person. I've watched many of your meetings. First and foremost, I just need to say how honored I am to be a finalist. To make it through what I understand was a very robust applicant pool of 21 people. It's just an absolute honor to sit here before you and speak about my experiences in Brockton and share what I can bring to the Mashpee community. Your commitment to fostering such a connected community that honors diversity and inclusivity and innovation and preparing our future leaders deeply inspires me. This, as I mentioned at the preliminary interview, is the only district that I've applied to for a reason. I'm not seeking simply a position of superintendent, but a leadership opportunity to bring Mashpee even further than it has already come. And so I welcome the opportunity to respond to your questions and hope that you see that I do fit at Mashpee. Thank you.
All right, with that, then the first question is a three-part question. What motivates you to leave your current position in school district? Why are you specifically interested in the opportunity in Mashpee? Part two, what do you believe you will be able to accomplish in this new role that you could not in your current role? And third, what makes you the best candidate to be the next superintendent for Mashpee?
The question, what motivates me to leave my current position, is something that I've been wrestling with because 30 years in one district is a long time. The deep connections to students, to families, to colleagues isn't a decision that I made lightly. I will say that I first entertained the idea of Mashpee when Patty DeVore announced her retirement. Something struck me at that time, and I thought, is this my next step? I'm very drawn to Mashpee. But at the time, Brockton was going through a great deal of turbulence. And I was so committed to the community that I didn't feel it was the right time. And I wanted to ensure that I continued, as I always do, to put the community that I serve first, as opposed to me looking for the next opportunity to lead. And then when the opportunity came up again, I got the notification through the MASC website, came through my email, and I thought, is this a sign? I believe deeply in signs. And started digging into the data and started really doing the research on Mashpee. Is this a fit? Is this what I want to do? Is it time? Is it the right time for me? Am I the right person to lead? And so I've been so fortunate to work in Brockton and come up through the system as a leader and learned so many things from the families that I work with, from the colleagues that I lead alongside. 12 schools and 7,700 kids, it's a big job. And we've made some great strides. But leading into that question, what would I be able to accomplish in this new role, is taking all that I've learned as a leader and applying it on a smaller scale. In a district as large as Brockton, we have to have very clear systems and structures to lead the work. And those systems and structures are what enable us to make positive change for our students. And so I would be able to bring that to Mashpee, all that I've learned, not to change what Mashpee is doing, but instead to improve, because we can always improve. Education is about continuous improvement and continuous learning. So it's looking at the strong foundation that Mashpee has already established in this community and building upon those strengths to make Mashpee the best community, not just on the Cape, not just in the South Shore, but in all of Massachusetts. I think I'm the best candidate to be superintendent in Mashpee. First and foremost, I think my experience speaks very loudly. Having been an instructional coach, a department chair of of the social science department at Brockton High, having been part of a leadership team that was able to turn around the largest high school in Massachusetts, to an associate principal for curriculum and instruction at both the middle school level and our alternative pathways, to my current role as assistant superintendent, I think speaks to my commitment to a community. I have been in Brockton my entire career. I student taught there in 1994, and I'm currently in my 30th year. So what I bring to you is not just the experience, but the commitment. This isn't just a stop on the way in my career. This is where I intend to remain.
All right, thank you. Dan?
In your professional and personal opinion, what do you see as Mashpee School District's current strengths and pain points?
Current strengths is such a tight-knit community, 3 schools, 1,400 students, and the rich cultural history and heritage here is such an asset to the students, and I believe that the school district is an asset to the community. The portrait of a graduate really reflects the dedication to preparing our students for success in a very dynamic and changing global society. During my visit, I heard consistently that Mashpee is well-funded. Those are absolutely some strengths, and there are so many. Walking through the Coombs and sitting on in a chair surrounded by 4-year-olds and their excitement. Matea's telling me he's in the Zipper Club. It's just the happiness, it's amazing. You can tell that there is a very positive climate and culture in the schools. The students are performing well. The teachers appeared happy. The students incredibly happy. And the leadership here is very committed to Mashpee. Those are very strong points. Now you, if I may, you use the word pain. Mm-hmm. I use the word opportunities for growth. And so if I can draw your attention to the handout titled I Fit at MPS, and what does our data tell us? And so understand too that I'm limited in the amount of data that's accessible to me as someone who's not in the Mashpee community. But I am a self-proclaimed data nerd. And this was one of the things that excited me as I started looking at Mashpee and would I fit at Mashpee. And so when I think about opportunities for growth, what you have in front of you is just some brief analysis that I did using the Student Outcomes Comparison tool. That tool is also referred to as the District Heat Map. It's what districts use to develop their Student Opportunity Act. And so in looking at that, in your Student Opportunity Act, you identified students with disabilities and low-income students as the two groups that are targeted for accelerated improvement. And so in looking at that and looking at their performance, specifically in ELA and math, through elementary into middle and high school, I just called out some data points, and you see some things that I highlighted there led me to wonder about some opportunities for growth. For example, when we look at students with disabilities and their performance in ELA, in grade 8, none of the students, 0%, were meeting or exceeding expectations. But by grade 10, there's a significant jump to 10%. To 13%. Now that's excellent, but it makes me wonder, A, how can we do better? How do we get all of our students to meet or exceed expectations? Because that is our growth, our goal. But what accounts for that shift? 5 to 6% meeting or exceeding expectations across grades 3 through 6, 0% in grade 8, up to 13% in grade 10. And so I start to wonder what caused that decline from the early grades to 8th grade. Is it a curriculum issue? Now, I did hear at a recent school committee meeting that funds have been allocated for ELA curriculum, and that implementation is in place, so I look forward to learning about that. But I also notice, again, just on the DESE website, so I can only speak to data that I've been able to analyze, that is it a lack of an identified high-quality instructional material that might be the cause. Now, I will be the first to say that a curriculum resource is not the be-all to end-all by itself. It is about effective instruction, but it certainly lays a foundation, because if you have a grade level, standards-aligned instructional resource, then your teachers have a solid foundation on which to build their instructional practices. And then what else, what do we, again, attribute grade 8 to grade 10 increase? Because those students are all in the same school, right? They're at Mashpee Middle High School. One of the things we look at in Brockton is the shift from grade 8 to grade 9, because they go from 7 middle schools to basically one large high school, and so we understand transition points are challenging. And so it makes me wonder again, is it curriculum? It's an interesting increase. Is it instruction? And so that is an opportunity for growth. Same starts to happen with math. 17, when we look at our low-income students specifically for math, in grade 3, 17% are meeting or exceeding. Grade 6, we're up to 25%, so we're showing growth. And then we drop to 9%. Makes me wonder, what's happening there? How do we dig into that and do a root cause analysis? And then you have an even more significant jump from grade 8 to grade 10. What's causing that? I do notice we, in my experience in Brockton, and our partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we are, when we are selecting curriculum resources, we go through the curate process, we look at ed reports to see what's highly rated, because it was research driven. And I noticed that our current, that Everyday Math 4 in K through 5 for 2021 meets expectations, but our current elementary curriculum, which is Everyday Math 4 from 2015, does not. So it just makes me wonder, is it time to look at upgrading? What are the differences between the 2015 curriculum and the 2021 curriculum? Is that something we should examine as a cause for student outcomes? Same holds true with the middle school and high school curriculum. Big Ideas Math for 2013 and Big Ideas Math, a Common Core curriculum in 2015 are also, we need to examine how they're rated in ed reports in terms of how they're supporting our students, especially our students with disabilities and our multilingual learners. And are they adequate to meet the needs of our students? So that's one of the biggest opportunities for growth that I see. If you turn that paper over just quickly, Again, opportunities for growth. I'm a little competitive by nature in a very healthy way, very healthy way. But when I was in Brockton and we were working to turn Brockton High around, at first it was meet or beat the state. Mashpee's already there. You're already meeting or beating the state. So now how do we then look at our surrounding communities? I know school choice is alive and well in Mashpee, and students have the opportunity to go elsewhere. There's also a lot of students choosing to come into Mashpee, and so that's certainly a positive. But when you look at how the neighboring districts are performing in comparison to Mashpee, it's another wondering. What might we be able to learn from our neighbors? In Brockton, I had experience with being caught in the Brockton bubble. As a large urban district and the largest high school in Massachusetts, it's very easy to think we know everything, and we certainly do not. And so one of my greatest experiences has been getting outside of Brockton to learn from others, because there are excellent practices that maybe we haven't thought about. And so developing those partnerships with surrounding communities, with the state, would be important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So this is a two-part question. The district has experienced a great deal of instability over the last few years in terms of administration, which has caused some degree of unease and trust issues within the school, with families, and with other stakeholders. How do you envision the process to create a stable and equitable environment so that the needs of the faculty and staff, the needs of the students, and the needs of the town are all considered? And then secondly, how do you see your role as superintendent in maintaining a healthy working and learning environment for all?
So while I certainly appreciate the instability over the last couple of years, I'm also cognizant of the current instability. Mashpee is faced with selecting a new superintendent. I know you have a sitting interim assistant superintendent, so you'll be seeking a permanent position there. I'm aware that your director of special education is also leaving. Those are three big positions in Mashpee. And so most importantly, it's important to establish trust. It's important to be transparent in everything. Especially, I am a Brocktonian in terms of my career. I live in South Plymouth, so I am close. But otherwise, the community doesn't know me. If they're watching or they watch this later, they'll get to see a glimpse of me, but they're seeing just this professional side of me who's answering your questions, and they may have many more. So transparent communication is critical. Making myself available as soon as I am able will be very important, so people can get to know me, the members of the community, the teachers, the leaders, the families, town officials, very important there. It's also important to communicate that, and I'll say it again, I said it earlier, this isn't a stepping stone for me. I wouldn't leave Brockton for a stepping stone. This is a commitment to me, and I can say that in words, but actions are what would really solidify that for the community. A strong commitment to equity. I was so inspired to see the grade 7 curriculum honoring the Wampanoag tribe and that exploratory course. And I mentioned at the preliminary interview that what I'd like to see, though, is how do we weave that rich culture and heritage into every grade for every student. It was such an honor when I was touring Mashpee Middle High School to be in the room that was built off of Mashpee Middle High School on sacred ground. And so really celebrating that and letting the community know I am deeply committed to equity and inclusivity and honoring the land that we are on here in Mashpee. I envision, as I mentioned, conducting listening sessions with all stakeholders and making myself available. During the community forum, social media, it was evident that members of the community were upset that we didn't hold it later. People are working, and that's something that I've done in Brockton, is make myself available in the evening hours, even if it's by Zoom, and setting up forums that way, because sometimes people have childcare issues, or it's one of those blustery cold winter nights and people don't want to leave. So really making making myself available by all means possible, so that people can begin to develop a relationship with me and me with them. I think establishing a superintendent transition team with representation from all stakeholders is incredibly important. As educators, we serve our community. They don't serve us. We work in service of them. That's how I've led my entire career, that I'm not here to be a boss. I'm here to be a source of support. And so ensuring that all voices are represented in the transition in my role will be critically important so that I can learn from them and that their experiences can inform my next steps. My role as superintendent will be to model that collaboration, and I lead by example. I understand that I had this conversation with a leader the other day. I said, not everyone is like us in terms of how we lead. We sometimes eat, drink, live, and breathe the work, and so if you give me something today and you want a product tomorrow, you'll get it from me. But we have to be cognizant of that that's not how everybody works. And so while I lead by example, I also understand that what I expect of myself, I have to tailor for others because we're not all insane like I am. It's very important to prioritize wellness for staff. My dissertation during my doctoral program was on the social emotional capacity of leaders, because we talk a lot about the social and emotional well-being for students, because Maslow's hierarchy, right? If we're not meeting their needs, we can't expect them to achieve. But if we want to truly support the social and emotional well-being of our students, we have to ensure that the adults in our community are also cared for. So I absolutely lead with empathy. I got a call from a principal the other day, a very upset parent, and the principal was out of the building, and she's apologizing because she's with her husband, who is having, and I'm not going to get the procedure right, but it was very invasive. And I said, you go take care of your husband, I got this. And so just reassuring people that I care deeply for them as people, and we will care deeply for the community and for their children.
All right. What are your top priorities for improving student academic performances across the district?
I alluded to that a little bit before. It's really looking at where are we performing well? Why are we performing well in those areas? In other words, is it the instruction? Is it the experience of the educators? Is it the engaging curriculum? How do we learn from others? How do we build up, model leaders, model teachers, and use them to support their peers? And so looking at instruction will be important. Students, we want our students to be excited about learning, excited about coming to school. They are so excited when they're younger, and something happens when they get older. I don't know if it's adolescence or if it's learning doesn't seem to be as mysterious anymore, or the curriculum. And so how do we make it engaging, and how do we really work to inspire them to see that what they're learning in their classrooms is applicable to the real world? When you get them engaged and you create that thirst for knowledge in them, they want to be there, they want to do the work, and you'll see achievements start to rise. I believe it will be important to look at our student groups, our students with disabilities and our low-income students, again, which you've identified in the Student Opportunity Act. Where are the areas that they are struggling as a group, and how does our instruction impact that? For example, in Brockton, with our Student Opportunity Act and our district instructional priority, we identified this year literacy and the grade 8 to 9 transition, but even more specifically, ensuring that our teachers are using data to inform their instruction, and ensuring that there are appropriate content and language scaffolds to meet the needs of our students with disabilities and multilingual learners. So helping teachers develop professionally. The teachers, you can tell by the student data already, are doing an amazing job. And so how do we continue to support their very hard work that they're doing in the classroom by providing opportunities for them to learn and develop? Again, learning is continuous, improvement is continuous. Just because I've actually been in leadership for a total of 20 of my 30 years in education, but I still have so much to learn. And so ensuring that we all live by that motto of being lifetime learners, I believe will help to increase student achievement. It's also important to align our teaching practices with a multi-tiered system of supports. And that's not just on the academic side, but on the social and emotional side. It's about ensuring the transition points from grade 2 to grade 3 and grade 6 to grade 7, that we're working together vertically to say, what are we doing in grade 2 to help grade 3? And it's not about, well, I had this conversation with Principal O'Brien when I was here last week. We often, at the high school level, would say, well, if the middle schools would only. And at the middle school level, we say, well, if the elementaries would only. That shift is starting to take place in Brockton because of the vertical conversations that are not just happening with leaders, but happening among teachers. So when, in Brockton, a high school teacher in grade 9 takes a walk around the middle schools, in the ELA classrooms, for example, they're able to see, oh, the kids can do it. Look at what they're already engaging in. That means I can do it with the students too, instead of thinking, oh, I have to reteach fractions, for example, in a math classroom because they don't know fractions yet. And so really supporting our teachers to have those vertical conversations will be important too.
This is a three-part question. What is your philosophy on delegating authority? How do you maintain accountability? And one of the jobs of a leader is to help set the tone for others. If you were the next superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools, what tone would you like to set? And what specific actions would you take to set it for our educators, students, professionals, and community members?
So the first part, my philosophy in terms of delegating authority, authority isn't, it has such negative connotations, right? I tend to look at it as empowering others. We're all in this together. There's no one person that can do the work alone. It takes a true team. And so you have to empower others by letting them know, I trust you to do the work. I expect you to do the work, and I'm here to support you in doing that work. But what does that work mean? That means I have to set clear expectations. I'll give you a very recent example. As part of our partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we have to do a mid-year progress update. That happened today. In the past, because we've been partners with them for a few years now, that has entailed me presenting to our partners about the work happening at the secondary level. We shifted that this year and had the schools come in and present their work. So when I first started in this role as assistant superintendent, 5 of our 7 middle schools were requiring assistance because they were among the lowest 10 performing schools in the state. I'm very proud to say that we only have 2 now under targeted assistance. One is right on the cusp of turning that corner, if not for chronic absenteeism, and the other one is making great strides. So both of those schools were asked to participate today. Our high school, you may have heard, was in the news quite a bit last year, but they're also on the cusp. They're only at 11% accountability right now. And so they are specifically named in our district MOU with the Department of Ed. We also have choice schools, alternative pathways. We have a virtual learning academy, grades 6 through 12, an Edison Evening Academy for overaged and undercredited students. And we have Champion High School, which is a smaller learning environment at choice school. And they're all identified for some reason or another. So they were all at the table today. And when I told them they had to present, of course they kind of panicked. And I said, we're presenting to each other at seminar format. We're not presenting to the Department of Ed. We're learning from each other. But I had to empower them to do that work. I had to give them very clear expectations. I said, you're going to tell your story in 4 slides in 10 minutes. And here's how you'll do it. What's your accountability data tell you? How did that inform your school improvement plan? What action steps have you taken to date? And how do you know that it's positively impacting the students? So that's how I delegated. I could have taken all their information and presented it, but it's not my story to tell, it's their story to tell. So I empower them to do the work. I set very clear expectations for them a month ago, and every week I checked in with them. I'm here, I'm happy to come visit and talk you through this. I'll be your thought partner. I said, and you need to submit your slides to me Wednesday night. so I can read them and give you some feedback. And that was very rewarding for me this week, to get their slides, to dig into them, and then engage in that feedback loop of conversation. And so that's how I kind of delegate authority, is to empower others, and maintain accountability is by setting those expectations, providing check-in points. When they're not meeting that expectation, to give them that feedback and support them to meet that expectation. It's not punitive. You have to ensure ownership. Many times we're told to do something, and we may not like what we're doing. So how do you ensure that they own that work, so that they buy into it? And hearing them out. We had one conversation with one school that wanted to present it a different way. And I said, I hear you, and you're doing amazing things, but you can't tell the entire story that is Brockton High right now. I need you to focus on A, B, and C. And I said, but own it, because you're doing some amazing work, but focus it here. And so one of the jobs as a leader, as you mentioned, is to set the tone. I think setting the tone is really first and foremost by being authentically myself. What you see with me is what you get. I've said that from my preliminary interview. I said that with all the groups that I met with. I am open, maybe too much to talk about my dog, a little too much now, much to my daughter's chagrin. She's second favorite now. We laugh. You can't take this work too seriously. It's hard work. It's probably the most important work. Partnering with our families to support the next generation of leaders is incredibly daunting. And so you keep it light, you set the tone, you build an atmosphere of trust and accountability, and mutual respect for one another is really the tone. A few years ago, our superintendent said, I want you to work hard and be nice to people. And that still rings true. We work hard and we're nice and we're accepting and we're inclusive, and we're all in this together. And that's a High School Musical theme song. I apologize for that one. I'm going to break out in a dance in a minute.
All right, thank you. Kathy?
I have another two-part question for
Okay.
you. Extracurricular activities are integral parts of a child's life, especially when going through school. How do you plan to support these activities financially, and what is your plan for attending these events? And then, many after-school clubs in Mashpee are shown to have the same high-achieving students. What is your plan to create more of an academically diverse participation rate?
When my daughter was younger, for some reason I signed her up for everything. And we were going to swimming and soccer and dance and t-ball all the time. But she loved it, right? So I absolutely believe that to educate the whole child is to provide them opportunities to learn outside the classroom. And those are life skills that they're learning in their extracurricular activities. And so it's incredibly important that when we are looking at the budget, for example, if we're faced with areas to cut, that is not, you cut farthest from the students, right? And so you do everything you can to ensure that those extracurricular activities are not just maintained, but how do we work to grow them? And oftentimes that means, and I've had great experience in doing so, seeking outside partnerships and other funding sources, whether it's through grants, whether it's through partnering with your local Y or Boys and Girls Club, as we have in Brockton. Attending these events is the highlight of the work that we do. Seeing the students outside of the four walls of a classroom, showcasing the things, their talents in areas that they love and excel in, and celebrating that. One of the lessons that I learned early on in my teaching career was to really know your students and know what they love outside of school, and then show up. Because when they see you supporting them outside the classroom, they know how much you really care. It's been more difficult for me lately. I moved to Plymouth 5 years ago, and it's quite a hike to Brockton, but I make it a point to get to as many of those community events. Oftentimes, it's more so on the weekends than in the evening, because getting home late at night is quite a journey. Living closer to Mashpee, that wouldn't be an issue, and so I would certainly immerse myself in the community. Your second question about the after-school clubs tending to be, did you say, more high-achieving, and so academically diverse. One thing I notice in schools, our middle schools and our high schools, is we tend to offer the same activities. You have band, you have cheerleading, you have the sports, what else, right? And so how do we tap into our students' interests and say, what do you want? When I was the associate principal at East Middle School, we sent out a survey to our students, said, what types of after-school activities would you like to see? And one of our most thriving ones was the crochet club. To see our this is stereotypical, and I apologize, but our male students embracing crocheting and the work they were doing with their hands and how quickly they could see the fruits of their labor as they're creating pieces was amazing. And so I think understanding what is it that our students are looking for and how do we offer those. At Brockton High, if a student wants to start a club, they just need to find an advisor. And so anything is possible. Of course, that comes with funding. There are some teachers who have volunteered. As much as I appreciate that, their time is valuable, and we want to honor that, and so we work hard to find funding sources for that, whether it's through fundraising or grants, as I mentioned, or partnerships with the community. But the way to engage all students is to ask them, what do you want and what do you need? And we'll make it happen.
Thank you.
Please provide us with a comprehensive vision for elevating special education services in our district. Specifically describe how you would assess current practices, implement improvements to instruction, and develop the capability of our special education teachers to serve our students on IEPs better. Include concrete examples from your experience demonstrating your effectiveness in leading such initiatives.
So there's a lot of parts to that, so I think I'm just going to speak to the whole, and if I miss anything, please just follow up and ask. One of the first priorities of mine when we're looking at special education at the secondary level in Brockton, one of the things that I noticed was the disconnect in the grid services from elementary to middle school. And so when you're doing your reeval or your transition meeting in grade 5 for grade 6, oftentimes the team chairs were writing grid services that were not in alignment with how a middle school schedule operates. That's a disservice to the students. The same thing was happening from 8th grade to 9th grade. So what we do, our schedule in a middle school was not aligned to a high school schedule, but we're writing grid services that don't align. And so we needed to really, again, close that gap in that vertical articulation. So we worked to do that. So there's the structure of the IEP to ensure the student is getting what they need, in whether it's grade A, B, or C services, and then it aligned with the structure of the school. Secondly, was to look at what supports we were providing in our schools for our students with disabilities. Prior to last year, our middle schools, for example, had one moderate special needs teacher for each grade. And so in a school of 600 students, maybe 10% of whom are on an IEP, if not more, could as high as 20%, it's difficult for them to meet the needs outlined in the IEP and for those students to make academic progress. And so our Office of Student Support Services, in collaboration with both myself as Assistant Superintendent for 6 through 12 and my counterpart, Assistant Superintendent Pre-K to 5, they reworked the model. And so now we're fortunate to have 2 moderate special needs teachers per grade in our middle schools, so that one can focus on the humanities side and the other can focus on STEM. That way the MSN is in the classroom supporting the student, not necessarily in a co-taught model, but providing those push-in services, as well as greater flexibility, not just to meet the grid C or pull-out services, but also to ensure that those students, oftentimes our students with disabilities, their schedules are so jam-packed that they don't get to participate in electives because of academic support and the requirements of the IEPs. So creating greater structures to support them in the moment enables them to then engage in other coursework so that they're not just in academic support and not able to take a world language, for example. Another task that we've undertaken the last couple of years is our coordinators for both ELA and math have worked with our assistant director for special education as well as our coordinator for inclusive education, grades 6 through 12, to offer professional development for our moderate special needs teachers in use of the district-determined high-quality instructional materials. So I might be a math teacher, and I know Carnegie Math very well, and I know how to design instruction and plan my lessons and deliver it. But does the MSN teacher who's supporting the students in my math classroom know the resources well? Now, they may not have to plan the math lesson, but do they know how to look at the materials and say, oh, look, here's some additional tier 2 supports that I can provide to my students during an academic enrichment or academic support block. So offering our moderate special needs teachers very specific content support has been a game changer. But I don't just want to focus on the work of our moderate special needs teachers, because educating students with disabilities is all of our work. And so what we've also been working towards, and one of my goals, it will happen, I promise it will happen, is to ensure that we are providing very specific professional learning for our general education teachers, if you will, our content teachers. All educators, in order to recertify, have to demonstrate that they've achieved 15 professional development points in both special education and sheltered English instruction. And districts are supposed to provide that professional learning, and they need to accumulate those 15 PDPs every 5 years. So it's incumbent upon the district not just to help teachers get, or help any educator, leaders included, get their 15 PDPs, but to help support them in best practices. A lot of my walkthroughs this year, especially the most recent ones in January, I've noticed we are scaffolding. We are scaffolding for our students. We are over scaffolding though. And so how do we work with teachers to say, you've got scaffolds under control, good. You're identifying the need for scaffolds, but now how do you make them, design them so that they're student specific based on data, based on the IEP? So it's really about supporting all teachers. You mentioned develop the capacity of our special education teachers to serve our students. I would say it's about developing the capacity of all our teachers and leaders to support our students with disabilities. I think did I hit all the points of your question?
I think you did, but can I just ask you to explain scaffolding in the context that you're using?
Yes.
Because my 6th grade education doesn't interpret it.
I apologize. Sometimes I get on a roll and that education speak comes out. And so if you think of a scaffold, right, like it sounds, a ladder, right, a way to access something. If I need to get to the roof, that's the goal. I've got to get up and I've got to repair the roof. I need something to help me get there. I can't jump. My legs are not that strong. I'm not that tall. And so the scaffold provides students an opportunity to access the grade level curriculum with supports. It's a layer of support. It could be a graphic organizer. So if I say, I need you to write, I need you to compare and contrast these 2 poems. I might give you a Venn diagram and teach you how to fill out that Venn diagram. That's a scaffold. So it acts as a support. It could be a scaffold, a graphic organizer to write an essay. It could be a linguistic scaffold such as sentence starters. So for our multilingual learners, if I'm asking them to engage in academic discourse with a peer, even if it's just a think, pair, share, turn to a neighbor, I might have on their table, taped to their table, some sentence starters to engage in a conversation to help them. So they're supports.
All right, thank you for the
Yes.
explanation.
Sorry.
I promise in the future I won't ask more than 2 or 3 more times about that. Thank you. Dan?
All right, so in your experience, what strategies and initiatives have you used in the past to assess and respond to the mental health, substance use, and social determinant of health needs of the students that you serve?
So I think there's both formal and informal ways that we've done that. Certainly our health and wellness curriculum pre-K to 12 is very robust and shifts to meet the needs of our students because they change. I think when I was in middle school, it was they were smoking cigarettes in the bathroom, and now they're vaping. So I get a lot of calls, both from leaders and from families, about helping our students overcome vaping because they don't understand what the problem is, right? Cigarette smoke, marijuana smoke has an awful smell. Almost that sense tells you that it's not healthy for you. But the way vapes are being marketed to our youngsters makes it sound fun. They're fruity and delicious, and it doesn't burn. And so there's a natural draw. So what we've done is not only do we reference the curriculum, but then we provide our families with supports and say, here are some resources you can access. What we've also done, we partner with EverFi, which is another free resource. And so we build in supports within the school day. So if a student, it's a way to discipline, if you will, but it's an alternative to discipline. It's a way to mitigate behavior. So we'll say, we caught you vaping in school. So after school, we're going to have you take this vaping course because we want you to learn why your behaviors are harmful to you. It's about partnering with community organizations. We're very fortunate in Brockton to partner with High Point Treatment Center, which is both a substance abuse and a mental health support system. Not only do they work closely with our teachers and our leaders, but also our peer mediators. The work that they have done with our peer mediators that then extends to the work they're doing with their own peers is nothing short of amazing. They do a photo voice competition every year. And I do not yet know what this year's theme is, but the work that they do to learn about the struggles that their peers are going through and then how they can support them is very important. So that community partnership is one. Mental health and well-being, I think we all are aware about what the impact COVID had on all of us. And everyone is saying, well, students are different. The world is different. It's not just students, the adults and students alike. So we've really made a concerted effort to do a couple of things. We have adopted and implemented Character Strong, which is an SEL curriculum that is infused pre-K to 12 in Brockton. We have partnered with Boston University to offer mental health screenings and surveys. We analyze that data and are able to immediately pull up any student and look at some of their areas of concern and provide immediate targeted support to that student and include the family in that work. We have the BRIGHT program, B-R-Y-T, and I apologize because in my nervousness I can't remember what the acronym is, but what it is a step up program for our students who are coming out of hospitalization. And not hospitalization for a torn MCL, for example, right? But for some significant mental health. And so this enables them to transition slowly back into high school in a very supportive way. In my work with students and families over the last few years, we have a director of social emotional learning, a coordinator of school-based mental health, and a coordinator of behavioral, I'm not going to get her title right, it's a long one. But what I often do is when I'm meeting with families and we're talking about the struggles that our students are experiencing, it's not always a special ed issue, right? Sometimes it is a mental health, it is an emotional issue. And so we bring everyone to the table and say what supports are available to help the student and the family. And we bring in the wraparound supports. I cannot express enough how important the community resources have been in supporting our students and families and ensuring that the teachers and the leaders within the district know what those supports are and are able to connect our families and our students with those supports.
Thank you.
Please elaborate on your management style. Share experiences you've had with staff or families that required you to navigate high tension or sensitive issues where things could easily escalate.
Where do I begin? My management style is I'm very collaborative. I can't even think of a time off the top of my head where it's been, we're doing it this way because I said so. That just in my experience doesn't work. It didn't even work raising my child. It's empathetic. It's understanding the stressors and the needs that are on our teachers and our leaders. For example, we have a district half day on Wednesday, which is PD, early release day. And oftentimes I will deploy the principals and the associate principals for teaching and learning and the assistant principals to go out to the PD so that they are engaging in the same professional learning that their teachers are engaging in. But right now, for example, 3 of our schools, not only did they engage in my district walkthroughs, they're engaging with TNTP, the new teacher project. We're partners with them in our math curriculum implementation. They're walking through next week. We are partnering with Better Lesson for our targeted assistance schools. They're doing walkthroughs tomorrow. Access testing, some of our schools have over 200 students. Brockton High has upwards of 1,400 students. So our leaders are going through a lot. So I said, you need to be in your buildings and focus on yourself and your team and the work that needs to get done there. So it's about having your pulse on the finger of what's going on in the school and understanding that, and I struggle with this sometimes, it's okay to take your foot off the gas a little bit because people need a chance to breathe, myself included. And I communicate, maybe to a fault, maybe over-communicator. I have been told your emails sometimes are too long, and I say that's why you should print them out and get a highlighter. But that is my style. I'm collaborative, I'm responsive, I'm empathetic, and I am transparent, I think is my management style. In terms of experiences that required high tension, to navigate with high tension or sensitive issues, I think probably one of the hardest things, I mentioned this at the preliminary interview, my first year in this role, I was told by our finance team, just simply, you need to cut 75 teaching positions from the secondary level. That's just cut them. And in transparency, and I cried because those are people. I get a little choked up now. Those are people, and that had a direct impact on our students. And when I had to tell the leaders, I'm looking at your enrollment and I'm looking at your class size, and we're increasing class size because I'm cutting teachers, it was one of the hardest things I've had to do as a leader, again, because of the impact on students. The other piece was, again, because of our budget, one of our alternative programs was at the Keith Building, so was the original Brockton High School at one time. The city took it over to tear it down to build a new public safety complex, which is much needed, certainly, but that displaced then a school. And we had to find a place for them. So we moved them to a beautiful building that was renovated, and it was working well. That was 2 years ago. And then things went south very quickly last year. We had to get out of leases that we had entered into improperly. And so that school, Champion High School, that was in the Jones building, had to be moved. Brockton High enrollment was down, so we essentially closed a building of Brockton High, if you will, and took this school, small learning environment school, and shoved it into Brockton High on the 3rd floor of the Green Building. And it was awful. But while we were making those decisions, I got many calls from families on both sides. I got calls from families of students at Brockton High who said, we don't want those kids in Brockton High. Because unfortunately, the Champion High School had a poor and inaccurate reputation that that's where the bad kids went, which wasn't true. It was where students who wanted a smaller learning environment so they could thrive went. And so I had to help navigate that. Also then, but families of students who chose Champion for a small learning environment were now being told, what do you mean I have to go? I took my child out of Brockton High because it's too large, and now you're putting them back in there. And these weren't my decisions. They were the decisions of the superintendent at the time, but as the assistant superintendent, I'm tasked with supporting his decisions as well as working with the students and families to explain the rationale behind those decisions. So those are probably two of the most challenging tasks that I faced in this role as assistant superintendent. I am happy to say that the lessons learned from having to cut 75 positions, and really using data to show the impact of that means we'll never do it that way again. We also have a better budgeting system in place. And secondly, the building moves. Champion is now back in its own building, and they are thriving. To listen to their mid-year report this year was nothing short of inspiring. To be over there and see the students so happy, to be back in their own place and have their own identity is amazing. And Brockton High is back to operating in 4 buildings with a full leadership team and moving in the right direction. So it was very rough. Last year is a year I don't ever want to relive, the last 2, as a matter of fact, but we're moving in the right direction.
This is a two-part question. How will you ensure culturally responsive teaching practices are implemented across all schools? What strategies will you implement to foster a positive and inclusive school climate?
So culturally and linguistically sustaining practices are essential for student achievement because it helps ensure that our students feel seen and heard and that their needs are being met, regardless of their background, their culture, their identity. I think to ensure these practices are implemented, you first have to identify what those practices are. We hear it said all the time, culturally responsive teaching, culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. CLSP is everywhere. It's the acronym that they use. But if we don't identify what those practices are and then support our teachers in implementing those practices, it doesn't matter. We can say we're doing it, but we, as leaders and as adults, have to approach the work of teaching teachers to do this work. But it's not just saying, okay, here's a toolbox with all the tools, and so if you pull out your CLSP toolbox and use those tools, you're good to go. It's also about knowing when to use which tools and for whom. So there are some broad practices that are good for everyone to ensure that our classrooms and the resources they use are representative of the cultures and the heritage and the history in our schools is a great place to start because that ensures representation, right? But then there are linguistically sustaining practices. For example, I haven't heard this in decades, thankfully, but no longer are you hearing, you need to speak English. It's now celebrating and those opportunities for students to engage in dialogue with their peers in their native language, especially in social practices, right? But one of the tools that I've used to ensure implementation, again, after you've identified the practices, because there are many, so you hone in on a few, you teach teachers how to implement them and when. But also then you have to monitor, right? Because what gets monitored is what gets done. And so the Department of Ed has a wonderful culturally responsive look for tool. So as part of the walkthroughs, we make that, we've identified that we're looking for these CLSP practices when we walk through classrooms. And when you don't see them, it's not punitive, it's calling it out and saying, hey, we noticed that in the 15 classrooms we went through today, only 10%, in only 10% were we able to identify those practices. What supports do teachers need to ensure that they're doing them? You're welcome.
Describe a situation where you had to take full responsibility for a challenging issue in the district, and how you addressed it.
So there are two. One is our Honors Academy. So historically in Brockton, we've had the Talented and Gifted program. So we have 11 elementary schools, and in grade 3, students are identified using, at the time, the COGAT battery of tests to determine a student's aptitude to enter into a Talented and Gifted program. And in a district as large as Brockton, only 75 students were permitted or admitted into TAG. 75 kids out of 15,000 students across the district. All right, so 75 out of 1,000 third graders. Then you entered into TAG for 4th and 5th grade. You come out of your neighborhood elementary school that you've been in since probably kindergarten. You go to a new elementary school for 4th and 5th grade because only one elementary school can have TAG. And then you go to one middle school. At the time it was Pliff Academy. because that's where all the tag kids went, because it was an international baccalaureate middle years program. At no time could any student ever enter, if you did not get into tag in grade 4, you could not get into it ever. Well, now, when you went to high school, you could take an honors class, an AP, and IB classes, that's great, but from 4th grade to 8th grade, those 75, that was it. That was it. Not very inclusive, number one. Didn't account for the fact that students' language proficiency and brain development over time shifts, as we know. And so we also noticed that there were less than 1% of students with disabilities in the talented and gifted program, and no multilingual learners in the talented and gifted program from grades 4 to grade 8. That's not equitable. And so we did bring a team together of teachers and leaders to say, how do we make this more inclusive and ensure there are greater opportunities for students as they continue to grow and develop academically, linguistically, and so forth. And so this team developed Honors Academy. And so what that meant was our students who were in TAG at the Angelo Elementary School would be in the Honors Academy. That was a given, because we know they were going into TAG in middle school anyway. But they would go to their neighborhood school, because now every middle school would have Honors Academy. And that would also enable our students to stay in their neighborhood schools instead of being bused across the city. So they're in their same neighborhoods with their friends that they play with on the weekends. Number 2, it allowed multiple entry points. And so we used data. We had MCAS scores, we had STAR assessment, we had writing sample in that first year. So we used data to identify students who had the capacity to engage in accelerated, rigorous coursework that would be in Honors Academy. So we grew and expanded what was a 75-student TAG program to what is now 1,200 students in Honors Academy across 7 middle schools. It sounds wonderful, and it is amazing. We are not quite to the percentage. We're only at about 5% students with disabilities and multilingual learners, but as our practices get stronger, we're able to increase those percentages as well. We've also offered multiple entry points. So you're in TAG in 4 and 5. I haven't touched that because that's elementary. I have stayed at the secondary level. But if you're in Honors Academy in 6th grade, we also check data again in October. We check it in January. And so there are multiple. We're constantly identifying students to move into Honors Academy. You don't have to be in both Honors Academy Math and Honors Academy ELA. Maybe you're stronger in one than the other. And so it gives students those opportunities. The talented and gifted parents were not happy. And they're small, but a very vocal contingent. So when we were explaining this new Honors Academy, I did have a listening tour. We were, of our 7 middle schools, we have 4 that are called Compass Schools in the north, south, east, and west side of the city. And so I presented it and all the benefits to students, and there were still incredibly angry parents because their child, who had been with the same students in TAG in 4th and 5th grade, now in 6th grade was going to be ripped apart from their peers and sent to their neighborhood school. And how are they ever going to make friends? And that is not fair. And so that is a reality, and that is a fear for parents. I get it. I understand. You're going to watch your child possibly not be able to go to school with his or her best friend they've been with maybe since elementary school. And so that was something we had to navigate. We did have some parents leave the district because they said we demolished the TAG program, when in essence we actually expanded it. And so that was a tough one. We still, it's not as vocal now, but that was you talk about the 4 frames of leadership, that was a political frame that was difficult to navigate because of the vocal parents, but it was the right thing to do for kids. And as long as the decisions I make are keeping students at the center, I'm happy to engage in those difficult conversations. Yes, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I appreciate it.
Yet another 2-part question.
Okay.
Describe what you would plan to accomplish as superintendent in your first 90 days in our district. And then secondly, describe what resources and support you envision needing from students, parents, faculty, and the community to help you.
All right. If I may refer you to pages 10 and 11 in the booklet. I'm very cognizant of the fact that, creating an entry plan without input from the school committee. So this is simply a framework, a collection of ideas on how I would enter into the work as superintendent. And so when you think of the first 90 days, if I may clarify, are you referring to beginning July 1st or beginning pre-entry? Or does it matter?
I'll let you decide.
Okay.
which one is-
All right, perfect. And so for me, I mentioned this at the preliminary, a member of the screening committee asked a similar question about like the first 100 days. I firmly believe that the work begins at the appointment, not at the start date of July 1st. Because on July 1st, I want to hit the ground running to the best of my ability. And so that means engaging and understanding the current state of Mashpee. As I mentioned earlier, I'm only privy to the publicly available data at this point. And so after being appointed and gaining access to more data and then being able to engage in open conversations with people while being sensitive to the fact that the interim superintendent is still working incredibly hard in his role. And really just getting in opportunities to engage with stakeholders, listening sessions with families in the community, likely obviously off-site, public library, for example, Dunkin' Donuts, things like that, and listening to members of the community, teachers, leaders, anyone who would want to attend, but really developing that, as we've talked earlier, about that trusting and collaborative relationship, so I can learn what the data doesn't tell you, right, that you can find. Immersing myself in the community, I think it's incredibly important. This, at the risk of sounding superficial, I grew up in Arkansas, K through 12, and was always fascinated by the rich Native American history that is in the Deep South. But I've been far away from that for a long time in terms of the level of immersion that I had then. And so really engaging in the cultural aspects of Mashpee, working with the tribal council, working with the tribal education department, and learning about their needs and wants for the students in Mashpee is incredibly important. The Brazilian Portuguese community in Mashpee is growing. I have a lot of experience with Brazilian, Cape Verdean, Portuguese in Brockton. And so really listening, though, to the different needs of those families here in Mashpee will be very important. But also understanding the changing landscape of Mashpee and what is that like now. Mashpee has grown exponentially. I used to spend a lot of time here. When my daughter was younger, we had family over in New Seabury. And just driving through here recently, it has changed so much. So getting a better understanding of how it's changed, the positives and negatives of that. And then really taking advantage of while schools are in session to hopefully get in and observe some teaching and speak to teachers, listening to what the teachers' needs are, meeting with the union and understanding what their wants and needs are. And certainly all part of that, underlying all of this, is what I like to refer to from my dissertation is that document review, looking at contracts, really examining. I've been watching the school committee meetings, and I appreciate the budget updates and understanding how the budget is formulated here and that it is 80% town funded is very important. But really digging into that work and doing my homework to get a solid understanding so that on July 1st I can start assembling that transition team and gathering that data and making a plan to move the work forward.
Since you've talked about the budget, this is a three-part question, and we'll tease a little bit more out about that. How do you go about planning a budget and taking it through the budgeting process? If there was a decrease requested by the town in the district's proposed budget for next year, how would you lead the district to resolve it? What would you think about? With whom would you consult? And how would you prioritize the many elements of the academic, student, family, and staffing needs of the district?
All right. One thing that fascinated me, because this has not been our practice in Brockton, is watching the budget process play out here in Mashpee, and that it started basically last spring for this coming school year. We haven't started talking about the budget yet in Brockton for next year. So I really appreciate the difference in the budgeting process here in Mashpee than my experience in Brockton. In Brockton, we're given a number. This is the amount of money you have figured out. And that's difficult to do at times because of the varying student needs. What I appreciate about watching this process so far is looking at past trends, explaining how the money is being spent, where the shifts are, why we're making those shifts, whether they're increases or decreases. You can't just roll over a budget and say, well, we spent that much last year, we're going to spend the same amount this year. It's important to account for increases in salaries based on union contracts, for example, retirements, technology upgrades, curriculum adoptions. And so you take, okay, this has been the pattern of our funding, and so we can pretty much anticipate this is what it's going to be, and how will that play out, and how do we allocate that money. Chapter 70 funding here is pretty stable, and so you can certainly count on that percentage. But it really is about looking line by line. Where did we spend the money? Where does it need to go for the following year based on the needs of our district? And how do we communicate that with the stakeholders? Because Mashpee Public Schools is funded by the people of Mashpee. And so being very transparent about how the money is being spent in support of our students is incredibly important. I really appreciate that at every meeting, part of the superintendent's report is looking at the budget and where we are in terms of spending it to date and making sure that we're on track. That's true accountability for everyone. As you know, much better than I, main function of us, one of the main functions of the school committee is oversight of the budget. And that is a key job of the superintendent, is to ensure that we are spending within that budget. In terms of a decrease requested by the town, you just actually went through that in watching your school committee meeting. I believe the town asked for a decrease in $150,000. And so the first thing to do, which did happen, is to ensure, as I mentioned this earlier, you keep it as far away from the students and the teachers as possible. And so in looking at the increase in circuit breaker money to Mashpee was a way to account for that decrease, as well as looking at the shift in retirements that we had anticipated in Mashpee that wasn't going to happen. And so making the adjustments that way is important. It's not always that easy, but the way I would approach it is, where are the areas that we can absorb this decrease that will not have an impact on our students and our teachers? And then finally, what would you think about? With whom would you consult? The budget is really a reflection of the district's values. The way the district spends the money and where the district spends the money says a lot about what the district values. And so it's first, again, and foremost, keeping students and their needs academically and socially and emotionally at the forefront, ensuring that our teachers are receiving competitive salaries. We don't want to lose them. They are committed to our students. Many of the teachers are members of the Mashpee community because they're residents here, and so we want to make sure that that is supported. And so it's about ensuring you're hearing from the stakeholders. You're working very closely with the town manager. Ashley, and what I've been seeing, is masterful at this work, and so leaning on her expertise will be incredibly important. But building a budget that keeps the student at the center and is incredibly transparent to our community is important.
Yep. So in your previous work experience, what strategies have you used to become a connected member of your community beyond your role as the leader of a school district?
Connected member. Beyond my role as a leader?
Correct.
I worked very diligently to educate myself in the community. I engage with the parents and the families at like the Martin Luther King breakfast, for example, at the holiday parade. Those aren't things I'm required to attend in my role, but that's where our families and our community members are. Haitian Flag Day, for example. And so showing my support there and making myself visible and available. Conversations in the grocery store aisles. I no longer live in Brockton, but I often had many a conversation in the produce department. Again, not part of my role, but as a member of the community. And so really being connected in that way. I think while I guess, I think sometimes it's hard to distinguish yourself as a leader in the district. So there's work you're required to do, right? There's things that are expected of you in a position, and then there's just who you are as a person. As a person, I make myself available. Students and families can access me. Granted, it is through work cell phone, it is through work email, it is through Teams chat, but I don't put a limit on that. And I just really think it's about being visible and being accessible and being somebody that they feel is one of them, that they can trust, that they can talk to, that they can laugh with. Social media, I'm not on it, but again, as a leader in the district, that's your expectation anyway, is to communicate that way. But I think it's just really about being visible, being present, immersing yourself in all of the celebrations that a community has to offer. And not necessarily as a member of the school department, but as somebody who just cares deeply for the community.
Thank you.
What professional development opportunities will you provide for teachers to enhance their instructional skills?
It's a little bit of a difficult question. I mean, they're all difficult, don't get me wrong. But in this particular case, it's hard to say what PD I would offer to enhance their instructional skills without having yet identified where they might need some supports, right? I'd hate to say, I think we need to work with teachers on using data to develop appropriate content and language supports, for example. For me to say that now would be a disservice to teachers because I'm not sure if that's where they need the support. So I would be able to certainly identify professional development opportunities after doing walks with leaders, popping into classrooms, and listening to teachers to hear what they need. Where would they like to grow professionally? I would certainly advocate for offering consistent professional development, though, for under, again, as I mentioned earlier, with the licensure piece and the 15 PDPs for special education and for sheltered English instruction. That should be for everyone because that is part of licensure. So that PD, but it would look different. You don't have to offer a one size fits all, like, okay, here's your 15 PDPs on special ed. It could be maybe for a brand new teacher, they need some professional development on the anatomy of an IEP and really understanding what an IEP does. Maybe for a more seasoned teacher, they want to better integrate technology into their teaching. So I think it would, to thoroughly answer that question, I would need to do a little research on what teachers believe that they need to grow and develop professionally, what leaders are seeing as we walk through classrooms and look at instruction, and where teachers as a whole could stand to grow.
Thank you.
All right, based on the time, looks like we'll go ahead and do your closing statement.
So just, again, want to thank you again for this opportunity. I can't say it enough. I'm honored to be here in front of you, to be a finalist. This is a very exciting opportunity for me. When Glenn called to let me know I was a finalist, I think for the first time in my years, I was speechless, just taken aback and so incredibly honored that you picked me. I think I sound like Sally Field. Was she the one that did that at her Oscars? But I want you to know that as your superintendent, I will lead with integrity and with empathy. I am, as I mentioned, collaborative and transparent. I am accessible, and I serve to support this community, the town of Mashpee, the school committee, the teachers, the leaders, and most importantly, the students. It would be my biggest honor to serve as your superintendent beginning July 1st. Thank you again for your time. This Mashpee Wednesday was one of the best days that I have had. Today was great too with our presentation, but really immersing myself in the schools and meeting with the teachers and the leaders and the students was truly a highlight of 2025. So I thank you for this opportunity very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a break scheduled till 8:05, give or take a minute, okay? So, we have some cookies, please help yourself, and we'll be back shortly.
Good evening. Hi.
Hello, good evening. All right, this is Latifa Alfonso Phillips. So we're going to have a 3-minute introduction.
Sure.
Or opening statement from you, then we'll have questions by the school committee, and then at the end, you'll have 2 minutes to do closing statement. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you everyone for having me this evening and for this opportunity to show you why I want to be here in Mashpee Public Schools. I'm Latifa Phillips. I have been in education for about 24 years now. Started as a teacher. I've worked in higher ed, administration, but what really drives me in public education is that I'm a first-generation college graduate. That is an identity that is always at the forefront for me because it's because of education that I have been able to have these opportunities that were not afforded to my parents, my grandparents, and I believe very deeply in education as an institution, as an opportunity for all children to be able to develop their assets, to develop who they want to be so that they can contribute to for themselves, but their family and community. So I think I'll stop there and share more about myself through the interview.
All right. Your very first question is a 3-part question. What motivates you to leave your current position in school district, and why were you specifically interested in the opportunity in Mashpee? Second part, what do you believe you will be able to accomplish in this new role that you could not in your current role? And third, what makes you the best candidate to be the next superintendent in Mashpee?
Sure. So I am completing my 6th year as the Assistant Superintendent for Equity and Engagement. And I am serving under my 2nd superintendent in Lowell Public Schools. At that midpoint was when the shift happened. And I had the opportunity to leave and go into another opportunity. But because I was the first equity officer for the district, because it was a new division, it was important for me to stay put and to continue the work that we had started. And so I really felt that the timing wasn't right for me to leave. And now, as I'm completing my 6th year, I'm completing my doctoral program in educational leadership. The timing just seems right. But I'm also specifically looking and hoping to be a part of Mashpee Public Schools. So you will not have seen me on a superintendent circuit because my specific interest is with this district. One, because of my belief and value just for supporting public education, but also I am a Tohono O'odham tribal member. I was raised in an urban context in San Francisco. I went through my whole education system, not really seeing myself represented in school. And when I went on to work in New Mexico and in Washington is when I had the opportunity to work with school districts and tribal education departments and tried to do my part in ensuring that Native students were able to have a public education that built who they are, but also that the other students in the district had an understanding of the importance of Native education for all students. And so because of those two backgrounds, I am particularly interested in being a part of Mashpee Public Schools. So your second part, what do you believe you'll accomplish in this new role? I had a chance to meet with your different administrators, walk through some of your classrooms. I was very impressed with the commitment, the level of instruction happening. Your achievement scores in many cases are outperforming, counterparts, the state. However, I want to be a part of identifying what it will take to go to the next level of proficiency. And I also am very committed to culture and climate for students and for staff. I think it's important that staff have a sense of belonging and sense of commitment to their workplace, because that will then impact the education that the students receive. I think it's important for the students to have a sense of belonging. Sometimes those two don't always match, and it is important for me. I would like very much to make sure that we have a culture and climate plan in place, that we have ways to measure this, usually through survey or other indicators, and that we are ensuring that students, staff, and families are having a good experience in this public school system. I also would want to know more about the policies and procedures around tribal consultation, and strengthen continue to strengthen the relationship between the Mashpee Wampanoag tribal nation as well as the school district. Through my work in New Mexico, there were formal procedures and policies in place that I'm, wondering, do they exist here? Because those kind of procedures can outlast any superintendent or school committee and just become part of the system. And then the concept of Native education for all is something that I'm very excited about. That means, collaborating with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe around the education that they want for their tribal members, and then everyone, all of the classmates, teachers, counterparts, everyone, what do we want them to know as well? Because that's something that is unique to this district, and I think it's something that should be celebrated and be intentionally cultivated. Okay, what makes me the best candidate? I'm a collaborative leader. I am a passionate leader. I have been in roles, chief of staff, special assistant, where I may not know all of the answers immediately, but it has always been my role to find answers, to work in teams, to set goals. And I believe that from my professional experience, I am well situated to step into a superintendency, and then also my lens as an equity officer, my lens as a cultural individual, multilingual individual. I think that I bring, hopefully bring that to my leadership as well.
All right, thank you.
In your professional and personal opinion, what do you see as Mashpee School District's current strengths and pain points?
Sure. So I think that the district is, the staff I met were very committed. Everyone was talking about students at the center, which I know is one of your values, and I was seeing that play out in the conversations that I was having. Your data is showing progress, and so I think that that was exciting to me, right? The starting point. I think you're in a very good position to, again, identify what needs to happen to move past, meeting proficiency and going towards exemplary. Pain points, I heard a lot about transition of administration and leadership. And so I think that is, I think the student asked, how long do you plan to be here, right? And I think teachers, administrators are wanting a sense of continuity, and that is something that I am committed to bringing. Um, I think that um, was the biggest pain point that I heard was the transition. In reviewing some of your materials, I saw that there's a focus on students with disabilities. I also saw focus on low-income students. And so I think, again, when we talk about, or when I talk about elevating the district and moving forward in our achievement, like disaggregating that data, really identifying who is being underserved or underperforming and why, will be part of what takes this district to the next level of achievement.
A great deal of instability over the last few years in terms of administration, which has caused some degree of unease and trust issues within the schools, with families, and with other stakeholders. How do you envision the process to create a stable and equitable environment so that the needs of the faculty and staff, the needs of the students, and the needs of the town are all considered? And then secondly, how do you see your role as a superintendent in maintaining a healthy working and learning environment for all?
Um, so I know that you're in the final year of your strategic plan. And I think that the strategic planning process really is an opportunity to bring stability to the district. First, because it's an opportunity for stakeholder outreach. And when I say stakeholders, it's not just the people who typically come out, but really reaching out to voices that maybe have been historically unrecognized. Because I think to make a system better, you really have to look at who is performing on the margins to really be a strong system. And so I would say that community engagement, family engagement has been a part of my role in most of my districts. And something that I have taken on in my current district is teacher voice and student voice. I do not roll out new programs and new initiatives without getting feedback from teachers. I have learned that you cannot successfully build something that you want teachers to implement if you haven't heard directly from them about where we might be getting it wrong or validating where we're getting it right. And also with student voice, that's also an area where in my prior districts, I would say that there had not been as much investment in student voice. And I have really seen the value of that, both in coordinating our student advisory council in my current district, as well as even going through school walkthroughs with students and just hearing their perspective. It's not always about who's right and who's wrong, but it's about getting to the right solution that meets the stakeholder group that you're supporting. And so when I say, listening and outreach, I mean top to bottom, right to left, and then also trust building. I think listening builds trust. And I think in order to be successful, trust has to be built. Your integrity has to be, received, validated, and that's something I feel very, very strongly, in my fairness and my integrity, and treating others with respect and dignity. And as relates to the superintendent, I believe the superintendent sets the tone, right? And so just want to add that into to respond to part two.
What are your top priorities for improving student academic performances across the district?
So first, we have to institute an equity lens. And really, in plain language, it starts with disaggregating data. It starts with really understanding how all different student subgroups are doing. So that's one of my top priorities is really identifying how everyone's doing and then what do they need to do better. And that gets into the teacher support because the teacher is the most important school-based factor. And so providing teachers with new tools, new interventions, opportunities for analyzing data. It can be grade level support, it can be small team support, and in some cases it's individual support. So I think differentiating the support that teachers need the same way that teachers differentiate support in the classroom for what students need. I also believe in evidence-based interventions. We can have a menu of interventions to choose from, but sometimes we go too broad, and that can impact, one, the progress we're making and how we can measure the progress being made. So it is important that we provide interventions that are backed with research and evidence for improvement. And it's important to use data for data-driven decision-making around instruction, around programs, because that way we can identify gaps early and monitor progress toward closing gaps.
Next question is a three-part question. What is your philosophy on delegating authority? How do you maintain accountability? And one of the jobs of the leader is to help set the tone for others. If you were the next superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools, what tone would you like to set, and what specific actions would you take to set it for our educators, our students, professionals, and community members?
So my philosophy is that in order to get the best out of people, out of staff, there needs to be trust and there needs to be respect. I also think it's important to assess and be aware of strengths and weaknesses. It's important to know what the different roles are and what skills the roles require and how do we match people properly to the different roles, and providing support for people who may have weaknesses or skill deficits to build those skills before determining whether or not they can do the job. So that's trust, respect, skill building. How do you maintain accountability? So I am a big believer in shared accountability. So what that means is that even where we have a lead, rarely can one person achieve the outcomes or maximize outcomes. Rarely can one person do that by themselves. So most of my work with my teams are cross-departmental teams, cross-stakeholder teams. We have a lead, but the lead also has, cross-departmental supports. It's also important to know what the goals are of what you're trying to achieve, because if the goals are clear, then you can monitor toward the goals. I think it's a lot easier to have a conversation around accountability when you have clear goals and you've already talked in advance what the goal is, what the metric is, and why we're not meeting the goal, or if we're exceeding the goal, what is contributing to exceeding the goal. But that clarity of the goal, the clarity of the steps, the clarity of the metric is part of accountability. And I would say transparency is part of accountability, because there's, I don't think there's value in hiding. I think that where we can be public about the challenges that we're having, when we invite other voices in, we can get to a stronger outcome.
This is a two-part question. Excuse me. Extracurricular activities are an integral part of a child's life, especially when going through school. How do you plan to support these activities financially, and what is your plan for attending these events? And then the second part is, many after-school clubs in Mashpee are shown to have the same high-achieving students. What is your plan to create more of an academically diverse participation rate?
Sure. So I am a very present leader, I guess starting with attending these events. I like to be a part of community events, school events. If I'm aware of it, and especially if I'm invited to it, I like to show up. As relates to extracurricular activities, I think it's important to understand that extracurricular activities are an extension of the school day. And in some cases, it's the extracurricular activity that makes the difference in whether someone comes to school or not. So when having to plan activities financially, I don't see extracurricular activities as separate from the discussion on a district's budget, right? The question is around the educational program. The question is around what do different students need in order to be successful? And if extracurricular activities are part of that, then extracurricular activities are part of the core instructional program. If there has to be financial consideration of extracurricular activities, I think it's important, again, disaggregating the data, seeing who is participating in different activities, how are these activities contributing to a student's success, and really making decisions that are not limiting equitable access, not only to academics, but to well-being, right? So again, there are many students who come to school for the after-school arts or athletics or club, and we have to be mindful that that's an incentive, and then we have to be careful that we're not creating a barrier to access. And so where finances have to be considered, we have to look at our priorities, align the budget with the priorities, identify efficiencies. Sometimes we have not been pushed to find an efficiency until it's budget crunch time. So I think always, finding the efficiencies and then bringing multiple voices into the decision are ways that I would support a decision around extracurricular activities. And then mini clubs having the same high-achieving students. So I think it's important to talk with students around why they're not participating. In my current district, we identified that our largest student group, which is our Hispanic Latino group, 40% of our population, was very severely underrepresented in like our advanced placement, our dual enrollment. And we just started talking to students, why aren't you enrolling? Why don't you, and students might say, I don't think it's for me. They might say, my friends aren't there, right? So we need to hear from students, why aren't you participating? And then identify, are there ways that we need to restructure programs or, add new programs that would incentivize students who currently aren't participating.
Please provide us with a comprehensive vision for elevating special education services in our district. Specifically describe how you would assess the current practices, implement improvements to instruction, and develop the capacity of our special education teachers to serve our students on IEPs better. Include concrete examples from your experience demonstrating your effectiveness in leading such initiatives.
Sure. So this is a challenge most districts are dealing with. I have not supervised the special education department myself, but in my role as an equity officer, I have worked with our special education department. With that said, some steps that I would take for elevating special education services. So it starts with an assessment of current practices. It starts with a data review of really understanding who are the students currently identified for special education services? What are the disabilities that we are seeing among our student population? I would also look at what are the current interventions being provided to students, and what is our assessment of what's working and what's not working. After collecting data, reviewing data, I think it's also important to observe some of the practices that are currently in place, kind of triangulating the data. And then once we have collected the data, reviewed, observed, we bring the different voices together. And I also want to mention, this isn't just teachers and administrators. Parents play a really large role in special education. There's the role of the student at home and out of school. There's a role of the student in school. And to truly understand the student, both parties need to come together with their information and observations. So that's another part that is important to include in an assessment of special education. Once we understand what are the disabilities we've identified, are there any trends? Once we understand who is in our special education, are there any disproportionalities within the special education category or the categorization of students? Because sometimes there can be an intersection of language, sometimes it can be a racial group that's overly represented in special education. All of these pieces we need to understand, because that's part of understanding whether there's bias in our identification process, right? So it starts with the identification process, and then what are the interventions that we're providing. There's the regular education teacher who's a part of this plan, because the regular education teacher is teaching all students. So that teacher also needs to be provided with professional development and skills around differentiation and interventions that happen in the regular classroom, right, in the Tier 1 classroom. And then our special education teachers need an additional level of training, because they are the ones specifically assigned to supporting specific student needs. And so we would need to develop a professional learning plan for both the general education teacher as well as the special education teacher. In some cases, they'll be working independently, in other cases, co-teaching. So the plan will need to include opportunities for the individual, one-on-one with the student, small group, as well as co-teaching between general teacher and special education. And then also with the parent, making sure that our parents understand what their rights are, understand what they can do from home to also help support their children. I think one of the challenges in special education is when we set low expectations, and whether the low expectation for what the student can achieve, whether it comes from the classroom or it comes from home, both of those can impact the student. And so that's why students and parents together in solving this type of problem is critical. As far as work that I've led, again, I have not overseen special education. I did oversee early childhood. So I'm going to speak to early childhood. And in our district, we had some concerns around kindergarten readiness. And the assessments where we were gathering literacy, numeracy, were showing that our students were very behind. Our teachers were concerned about whether this was from, COVID, some of the impacts of how that period impacted child development. And so looking at the data, we had to define what is kindergarten readiness. And kindergarten readiness, we are transitioning children from home to school, right? So again, when I was talking about special education being about parents and students, early childhood is also about students and parents. About parents and teachers. And so we defined kindergarten readiness with teachers, and we were looking at the indicators of literacy and numeracy, but our teachers actually raised to us, we need students coming ready to learn, right? So we weren't even taking into account the need to be ready to learn and then how that was impacting those first year assessments. So instead of just focusing on what was happening in the classroom, we focused on partnering with parents for how do we get a student ready to learn, right? Our teachers had defined ready to learn as being disconnected from technology for periods of time so that you could come and concentrate. It was toilet training. It was being able to recognize your name, right? Just so that you could get to the classroom and be ready to learn. Another area that we identified was we weren't doing enough pre-assessments for teachers and administrators to roster students, right? And so we found that some teachers, especially our new teachers, might have gotten a couple of students with advanced behaviors, but had we known some of this before we rostered the students, we might have been able to distribute the students in a different way. So we implemented earlier screening and providing that information to schools so that they could roster differently. And then we provided training for kindergarten teachers around de-escalation, right? So before we say the student is the problem, we need to make sure that we've used all of our tools and all of our interventions to make sure that we've set up the learning environment the best way for the student. And then once we are confident that we've done that, now we can look at who has not been able to be served with those changes we've put into place. So this year has been a much smoother year with those pieces that we've put into place. And so we are monitoring, our literacy and numeracy is still inching along, but change doesn't happen overnight. And I think sometimes we come to a conclusion too quickly of when something is or isn't working. So we are staying the course. We feel that teachers are happier now that the classrooms have been distributed, now that they've received the training, and now that we have more parent partnership. And so tying that to special education, it's important to, again, gather that data, analyze the data so that we're really solving the right problem, because we thought we were just going to solve numeracy and literacy when we really were solving, are you ready to be in a classroom environment with 20 other kids? And then again, the parent-teacher relationship in early childhood was critical, and I also believe the parent-teacher relationship in early childhood, in special education, will also be a critical factor in students' success.
I just wanted to make one comment. Since you were talking about early education, here in Mashpee for about 10 years now, we have a universal pre-K program for age 4. We were one of the first ones, I think, in the state to do that.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Okay? Sorry.
That's okay. All right. What strategies and initiatives have you used in the past to assess and respond to the mental health, substance use, and social determinants of health needs of your students?
Sure. So this is an area that has really in my current district, we have placed a priority on it, especially since COVID. And so I can't say that we are at the well-developed implementation stage, but we are at the stage of gathering data, screening, and providing supports to students, but not like proactive preventative supports. It's more, once we identify that there's a problem, we need to connect you with some interventions, right? So that's not an ideal situation. We don't want to just support students when they're experiencing mental challenges or emotional or behavioral challenges. We want to be proactive in providing any education that we can, not only to students, but again, to families. So we do implement a youth risk survey, at-risk survey. Do you implement that in your district as well? Yeah, so that's able to provide us with some information about the at-risk behaviors that our students are engaging in. But again, we're just at the data collection phase of that. We have relied on community partnerships to provide some of the treatment and support that our students need. We have adopted an SEL curriculum, but while we have adopted the curriculum, nothing can be properly implemented if we don't have a training structure. So that is something that we are strategizing and planning for next year, is who can implement this curriculum, how can we integrate it into students' learning so it's not just 15 minutes in homeroom, but how is it actually integrated and practiced throughout the regular classroom. I will say that one area more concrete that I was directly involved in is in New Mexico, especially supporting, I can think of at least 2 of our rural districts on tribal land. And I think the experiences that our students were having required us to consult and have a relationship with the tribe and their families. In some cases, we were able to institute cultural practices or traditional practices to help support students. So I'm thinking in one case, one of our districts worked with the tribe to have a drum circle for some of our male students, and they really saw that that was effective in building, relationships among the students, building confidence, building trust. And so I think because we're here at Mashpee Public Schools, because we have a tribal nation here whose students we're supporting, I think that these are opportunities where we can, through consultation and dialogue, figure out if there are cultural or traditional ways that we can support students in these areas. More broadly for the district, I also think in some of our communities, these are taboo topics. And so it's important that we also have like a family community strategy around, once we've identified if there are, so let's say if there's a substance abuse issue in the district, right? If we find that through our surveys or data, then we need to figure out how do we also talk to families about what we're seeing, so that we can work together, because students are home more hours than they are in school. And so again, we need that parent-school partnership.
Please elaborate on your management style. Share any experiences you have had with staff or families that required you to navigate high tension or sensitive issues. where things could easily escalate?
So, my management style around high tension sensitive issues, I try to be a voice of reason. I try very hard to be diplomatic and always start with listening. I think we can't learn and grow if we don't understand why someone's upset or what's behind. Often it's fear, sometimes it's misunderstanding. So my style is to really listen to understand, even on tense issues. I'm in equity office. I had to manage race, culture, identity, curriculum, issues where there were disagreements. And I had to listen to understand, right? First, listen to understand. And then I think it's important to educate. Education and try to provide, I'm going to say, objective education. And when I say that, I mean we have a responsibility to protect rights. We have a responsibility toward non-discrimination. We have different responsibilities, and sometimes it's important for us to share why we are going to stand behind certain curricula. Why we're going to stand behind different student clubs, employee resource groups, things like that. But I think the first step is diplomatically at least listening. And I do think that can solve not all problems, but I think many times people want to be heard and they want to be respected, right? And then we provide the clarity of information and we stand behind it.
This is a two-part question. How will you ensure culturally responsive teaching practices are implemented across all schools? What strategies will you implement to foster a positive and inclusive school climate?
Sure. So, I've had a lot of experience with this in my current district, right? Some things I won't recommend that we move forward. A lot of like the one-shot trainings, the trainings that aren't tied to like embedded professional development just aren't as effective. So ensuring culturally responsive teaching practices, well, first we have to define what they are, and everyone has to understand what they are. In my current district, we define culturally responsive teaching practices as having three facets. One is high expectations for all, right? High expectations means grade level materials. It means, expecting that all students of all different subgroups can perform, right? And then another facet is like culturally responsive curriculum, right? So students being able to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, learning about different viewpoints, different perspectives. That's probably the one that we often think of when we think about culturally responsive. But having the high expectations is also important because that's putting on your radar that there may be some implicit bias and you may be ignoring this group over here, but you've got to set an expectation that this group over here can achieve too, and what do I need to do differently? The third piece is sociocultural awareness and problem solving in the community, right? So we're not just learning for the intellectual exercise of learning, but that we're learning to solve and identify problems within our community. So those are the three pieces that DESE also identifies as culturally responsive. And I'm not saying that this is like the perfect definition that we need to adopt here, but I do think that those are kind of three research-based facets of culturally responsive teaching. So those three pieces, the definition needs to be understood, and then a professional development plan for how to achieve a culturally responsive classroom. And I mentioned that embedded professional development is really critical. This past year, you know, there's that saying, once you know better, do better. So it's kind of like, okay, we gave it to you, good luck. But we really have to be intentional about, how does it actually translate into the classroom?
Describe a situation where you've had to take full responsibility for a challenging issue within your district, and how did you address it?
Sure. So I think as a leader, it's important for staff, family, students to be able to trust you, trust that you're transparent. And I'm thinking about, in many of my districts, I oversaw student assignment. And student assignment is one of those areas where people really question your trust, right? Can I trust that this process is clean and fair? No one is going to call and, get a seat assignment because they knew someone, right? In my last district, we opened an international baccalaureate school and a middle school. And we let families sign up, and we were going to have a lottery. When it came time for the lottery, we ran it. Everyone got their number. Students got assigned. After the lottery, we found out that a couple students, their applications had not been placed into the lottery. And the recommendation of the principal was that, it was our error. We just put the students in, we move on, right? And let's do this quietly. I thought there's no such thing as a quiet, assignment process, right? No one will trust us. No one will trust this process if we are not open and transparent about it. And I was worried about, in a high stakes situation like this, worried about acknowledging, that there was an error. But for trust and integrity, it was important that we do that. But that we do that with a plan, right? I think sometimes people get frustrated when you just say, I just want to be open that this happened and I don't have a plan yet, right? So what we ended up doing, was running a second lottery with the new names included, and we shared with families. The first lottery stands, everyone's number will be honored. And the students who were left out, wherever they land, they will be slated alongside the number of the first lottery, and we will also honor that. And I was relieved that families appreciated that openness and that honesty, and I was glad that we went that route because I think, again, being fair and being trustworthy are two critical pieces if you're going to lead. And even when you make a mistake, if people trust that you are honest and that you can come up with a plan, I think that helps to strengthen your leadership.
This is a two-part question. Describe what you would plan to accomplish as superintendent in your first 90 days in our district. And secondly, describe what resources and support you envision needing from students, parents, faculty, and the community to help you.
So I think an important part of onboarding is, your listening plan. And so that's what I would definitely focus on is, coming up with that plan of who to meet with, who to talk with, who are all of our stakeholder groups, again, whose voices haven't been heard before. It'll also be important to review existing data. That includes both the academic and the non-academic. And when I say non-academic, I do mean behavioral and attendance and such, but I also mean culture and climate data, and understanding how students and parents and staff are receiving the district. I think that whenever a new leader comes in, it creates a lot of stress, right? People want to know that the new leader isn't just going to come in with new ideas and or come in with criticisms and just understanding a piece of the problem. I think that this district is performing at a level where, the conversation is around going from good, to great versus, we've got a fire situation that we need, immediate turnaround. This is not that kind of district. And so I think that in order to really honor the work being done, it's important to understand what is working well here, what is the evidence that it's working well here, and then what is the evidence that things may not be working well. And once we know what's not working well, it's important that we take time to develop the plan, a shared plan, because we get the best out of staff when they're a part of the plan versus when they are told what the plan is. And I know that your district has a portrait of a graduate, and I'm coming from a portrait of a graduate district, and that was something that I learned even just in developing the portrait of a graduate. We have one very large comprehensive high school, and they had what they called writer values, which were like the portrait of a graduate. And so their feeling was, okay, new leader coming in, new values, new poster, and it was important to really talk through, what are the writer values? Are they also incorporated into the proposed portrait? But just letting people be a part of it results in greater success than bringing something in leader driven.
This is a three-part question. How would you go about planning a budget and taking it through the budget process? Number two, if there was a decrease requested by the town in the district's proposed budget for next year, how would you lead the district to resolve this? And third, what would you think about, with whom would you consult, and how would you prioritize the many elements of the academic, student, family, and staffing needs of the district?
Sure. So I would build a budget using the zero-based budget process. So we would look at what are our priorities, what are our goals, and then based on that, build the budget. Obviously, there are pieces of the budget that are not discretionary. So we also need to be aware of what are those non-discretionary costs. We call them guardrails, things you can't get around. Every building has to have a principal. Do you have an assistant principal structure? Do you have a teacher-student ratio that's in your collective bargaining agreement, right? What are those things? Special education supports, English learner supports. Like, there are some things that you cannot get around, right? And then what are the other priorities? What are the strategic programs, trainings, curriculum that need to be purchased, that need to be implemented? And you start there. in our last process, we would ask ourselves, what would happen if we stopped doing this, right? We have to ask ourselves those kinds of questions to really get to the bottom of, is this something that that I just feel really good about, or is this something that is really making a difference for students, right? And so those are some of the steps that I would take in planning the budget. Now, if there has to be a decrease, again, we would need to assess um, the success of the resources that we're currently using, right? Sometimes we put things into place because we can. It doesn't mean that everything is working. And so again, ideally, you would be having these conversations with, regardless of whether you're in a budget crunch. However, the budget crunch tends to really push you in the direction of considering, is this, an effective resource or not? I'll give an example of when I was in Washington, the tutoring program, the state had funded a tutoring program, and then there was a question of how effective is the tutoring, right? Is this tutoring really making the difference in student outcomes? So we would need to ask questions like that. And then there's a second level to that kind of question, because even though the tutoring, in the case of Washington, might not have been working as implemented, there are ways to have a high impact with tutoring, but it has to be structured differently, right? It has to be tied to, what's being learned in the classroom, or specific, skill deficits of a student. So then you have to have the question of, is the resource working the way it's supposed to right now? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then the question is, is there evidence that if structured differently, this resource could make a difference in the classroom? And then if the answer is yes, you may keep the resource, but you have to restructure it, right? So I think evaluating what we're doing, who's doing it, how we're doing it, the impact of what we're spending money on. Sometimes we might spend money on a little project that's only impacting, a small number of students, and it's in competition with other student needs. We just have to consider those pieces. We don't do it alone, right? We educate about the problem, we educate about the finances, we review the data. I don't know that everyone is ever happy when we have to do budget cuts, but the more that we communicate, the more we're transparent, and the more we set a vision for the success that we still expect to see, I think we can get people around that, right? So we're cutting budgets, but if we're more efficient in this way, we will still see these outcomes, and you can hold me accountable for it, right? So I think it gets back to the accountability piece of, we, are still responsible for the outcomes of our students, and every decision we're making has to be a calculated decision that will still be able to move students forward.
In your previous work experiences, what strategies have you used to become a connected member of your community beyond your role as the leader of a school district?
So I am a very community-based person. I really enjoy being involved in the community, both within my work capacity as well as my personal capacity. I typically will attend my neighborhood association. I was a library board member in my previous city because I believe in literacy. I was a reading teacher, reading ELA teacher. So wherever I can use my professional skills in my personal life, I believe that, that's just my personal philosophy of I've had these privileges, I've had these opportunities, and I always want to create the opportunities around me.
What professional development opportunities will you provide for teachers to enhance their instructional skills?
So the same way that we differentiate in the classroom, we need to differentiate supports for teachers. That means looking at how students are performing. You know, is there anything that we can take from student performance data and draw any conclusions about what training might be helpful for a teacher to close some of the gaps? So for example, I was in classrooms last week, and in a few classrooms, I saw that the teachers had centers, you know, in their classrooms. The center with the teacher seemed very structured, seemed to be working well. The center with the paraprofessional, less structured, not working as well. And then the independent work, the independent and pair work, it wasn't quite clear whether the students understood what they should be doing during that independent time, right? So when we were debriefing, one takeaway was, let's get really clear about what are the structures and routines when we have centers, right? So that we can make sure, that when the teacher steps away from the classroom, the broader, students, everyone is still, using that time and knowing how to move forward. Another piece we took away was, what is the role of the paraprofessional in their literacy group, right? Because we were observing some literacy practices that usually you would expect from a literacy coach, right? Or someone with more literacy training. And so our takeaway was, in order for the paraprofessional to be successful, in order for the students to be successful, we have to be really clear about, what role the teacher plays, the paraprofessional plays, and then what the students should be doing, right? We didn't see that problem in our math classes. That was more our literacy classes. So again, we would tailor that kind of training for the literacy teacher. So I think we have to gather data, we observe, and we don't have solutions that are like one-size-fits-all solutions. We have to be really thoughtful about the problems that we're seeing, and then, how to apply the solutions.
All right, that's the end of the regular questions. Does anyone have any other question that they want to ask at this point? Brian, you're good? Dan? All right, with that, we'll go ahead and let you do your closing statement then. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I thank you again for this opportunity. And I'm very hopeful that I was able to show you some of my background, who I am, how I lead. I want to come back to just, my values, my beliefs, because I would not want to work in a school district where didn't feel I was aligned in my values and the district values. And that was even before applying for this district. I did look at your strategic plan. I looked at your portrait of a graduate. I looked at your mission, vision statement to see, is this a district that believes in being student-centered, that believes in equity? And I feel that the answer is yes, which is why I'm very excited for the potential to be here. I also feel very strongly and very committed to working on behalf of and in support of Native communities, tribal communities. And so that is also, a big draw for me, wanting to be specifically in Mashpee. And I also, I like the idea of a smaller district, right? Because I think, many of the staff shared, it's like a family. We know each other. We raised our kids together, and we want the best for the community. And so that's something that I believe the school district is for the community. And I want to be, no matter where I go, I come in developing and supporting the district for the community. And so that's what you could expect from me. I'm not coming in to bring all of my big ideas from all of my different districts, but I do bring experience, from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, that I want to share, right? And I want to learn. Everywhere I go, I learn. And I think that bringing those two pieces together is where we position our district to maximize its potential. And as one student asked me, he said, how are we going to make Mashpee the best on the Cape? And I said, oh, okay, that's let me think about that. Let me think about that. So, but I appreciated the question, and I thank you for this opportunity to get to know you and to share who I am.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and have a very safe
Thank you
trip
very
home.
much.
For everyone else, just a reminder, we do have a meeting on Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. here in the Quashnet Library. It will be televised also. If you have any feedback, we do have forms back there somewhere. I'm not sure what happened to. Oh, up here. We greatly appreciate and will review any feedback that you provide us. If you're not here physically and still want to communicate and provide feedback, we welcome that. You can send it to to school committee at Mashpee Public Schools PK.12. So MPS PK12.org. Okay, and Sean Maroney did verify that works. That will get your feedback to every person sitting or every school committee member. So you don't have to send it to one person. You can just send it to all. But if you do send it to one, just know it will get distributed to everybody so that everyone does get the same feedback and have the same information in order to make decisions. All right? Thank you very much. I have a motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved. Second? Second. Any discussion? Nope. Dan? I vote yes. Kathy? Yes. Brian? And I vote yes. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here.